In the days of old, the sorcerers of Riverlong cured the sick and healed the wounded through a great power called Source. But a terrible darkness invaded the land, and Source was forever tainted. The sorcerers who once healed now only destroy, and madness has overtaken them. A few brave Source hunters are all that stand between Riverlon and the dark power that threatens to destroy it. Wherever Source appears, hunters follow.
Rise and shine, Master Source Hunters. The captain wants you up on deck. Hear them gulls? Means we're close to shore. I don't ever you go in there, Master Source Hunters. City's full of undead, hungry enough for blood. But you're supposed to investigate that murder, ain't you? They say it's Source that did the Councillor in. Source in a city like Sicil, nowhere safe anymore. Here they are, Captain Sir.
God's blessings on you, hunters. You'll be happy to hear we've reached Sicil. But there's trouble offshore, so we'll have to sail in carefully. Here, have a look. Those are Orc ships, and they're blocking our passage. We'll get you as close to the city as we can, and drop you off on the beach. Be wary now. Orcs are on the attack. Undead have closed every route out, and there's a sorcerer on the loose. If we're to get justice for the Councillor, you'll have to keep your wits about you. May the luck of the gods be with you both, Source Hunters.
What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you the full story of Divinity, Original Sin. Finally, the more modern games. So, a couple of caveats jumping into this, especially if this is the first full story of series of mine you happen to be watching. Pretty much just going to cover the main plot. Like, I'm not really going to touch on a ton of side quests, that kind of stuff. Pretty much just focused on the main narrative here. So, with that in mind, Divinity, Original Sin, and its sequel, Original Sin 2, are going to be a little more difficult to do that with because, as opposed to the old games, which were designed around a pretty straightforward narrative, like a clear main story, there is a main story in Original Sin. It's just that the game can also be completed in like 30 minutes, and you can skip tons of it and never see any of it, and it not really matter. So it was a little harder to nail down specifically what to show, at least for me personally. So again, just trying to follow the main narrative arc here is really the point. So that may lead us to a few side quests here and there, but I'm not really trying to cover a ton of them, so just be aware of that. So, the game starts out, as the cinematic at the beginning of this video told you, just outside of Sicil. We are two source hunters sent to investigate a murder that happened in Sicil. Due to an Orc Raid that is happening near Sicil, you're unable to actually get into the city proper, and you have to be dropped out onto the beach nearby. Now, once we actually come to and can control our characters, we have the option to read our orders, which basically just tells us the captain of the Source Hunters has sent us to Sicil to investigate the murder. Basically stuff we already know, but if you want a little more context and some lore kind of flavor text, if you will, you can read those and find out. But going up along the beach, the first person we run into is a sorceress named the Conduit, who pretty much attacks us on sight by summoning undead. She herself runs away, but the dialogue she talks in the meantime specifically mentions plumbing a tomb for a stone of some sort. Now, after we defeat her undead minions, we have the option to explore said tomb, which primarily just serves as a tutorial area for the game. Now, you can completely skip this. There's not really anything important in there story-wise. However, there is a tiny bit of foreshadowing at the very end of it, because apparently there was a stone in the tomb that was stolen by the Conduit and her followers. Moving further up along the beach, we run into two guards guarding a bridge. They are guards from Sicil. We can confront them directly or have them lead us to the wizard who summoned us. Depending on your dialogue options, you will either have to fight and kill them, or they just lead you farther up the beach. So if you go farther up the beach, you pretty much immediately run into an Orc Raid right outside the city that we saw earlier from the cinematic. Now, we have to kill the orcs. They are being led by a human, which is an important thing for later. So once we get this done, we can head to the city gate proper, where we are immediately met by a man named Arhu. Now, people who have played Divinity a ton will realize Arhu has actually been in most of the games. I think the only one he's not in is, well, two of them actually, is Beyond Divinity and Dragon Commander. That said, his role in Divinity 2 was like a tiny little cameo in the very end cinematic, so there is that. But whether or not you know Arhu aside, he gives us important information that he was the one who summoned us to investigate the murder of a man named Councillor Jake, who died under suspicious circumstances, to say the least. Now, what Arhu actually does is tells us to go speak to Captain Arias, I believe is how it's pronounced, and get permission to investigate the crime scene, because Captain Arias, right, while he is not the mayor, is ultimately kind of the leader of the town, and you need his permission to do so. Now, if you choose to speak to Arhu, you can also get more information from him. Basically, the prime suspect seems to be Councillor Jake's wife, Esmeralda, though nobody really has any real proof of anything she's actually done wrong, so there's all that going on. But basically, he gives you leads to investigate in this murder. So, from here, before we actually go see Captain Arias, I recommend scouting around town a little bit, because you can run into 4 of the possible companions, which is all of them, pretty much around town here. Now, you can only choose 2 of them to adventure with you at any given time, but you can pick up all 4 of them a little later, but we'll get into that in a while. These are Medora, the retired source hunter who you can meet in the inn. There is Bear Doter, which is the wild woman who attacked some guards and is thus in a jail cell. There is Wolgraf, the mute thief you can find in a cavern below the city. And there is, lastly, Jhon, the demon hunter, which a lot of people will recognize from Divinity Original Sin 2. What you may or may not have known up to this point is that he was actually a playable companion in Divinity Original Sin. And obviously, where Divinity Original Sin is set about 1,200 years before Divine Divinity even, makes Jhon very old, much like it does Arhu and a couple other characters. All that out of the way, we can go speak to Captain Arias. So, with speaking with Captain Arias, the main thing he tells us is basically that he doesn't like us and he wishes you weren't here. That's pretty much it. He also does give you permission to investigate the crime scene, which is the main thing, and much like Arhu, you can get his perspective on possible leads during the case, but nothing really substantial. Basically, he tells you that if you can provide proof, he can have people arrested for you, which is important, and now we go investigate. The crime scene is really the next big step. From here, we obviously go investigate the crime scene. Now, the crime happened in a room at the King Crab Inn, which is the big inn in town. We go to that inn, we investigate the crime scene, and upon giving the guard the heads up that we are given permission to enter the crime scene, and, then entering the crime scene, we can pick up a stone called a Starstone, and we are immediately teleported away to a strange place, otherwise known as the End of Time. So, this is where the game takes a bit of a different turn. Going up the little path here, we can run into an imp named Zixzax, which is also a recurring character from Divine Divinity, I guess, originally. He is the imp that is immortal and happens to chronicle all of the things that happen. And as you might imagine, he is very shocked to see you here at a place called the End of Time. So basically, he says a lot of lore stuff, but the main thing is that he wants you to look through his telescope to see what he sees, and once you do so, you see the Void Dragon, which is basically hastening the End of Time, which is why you're here. Now, while you are speaking to Zixzax about this, a portal opens up behind him, and Zixzax puts together that not only are you here, but the portal seems to have reacted to your presence, and that he thinks he knows where it might lead, but he'd rather show you than, just tell you. So all of you jump through the portal, and just as Zixzax imagined, you arrive at a sanctuary of sorts, but again, basically still in the End of Time. And this is where you meet the Weaver of Time, which is another chronicler of time, much like Zixzax himself. So it's interesting with these two, because basically they're chroniclers of time. They're like two sides of the same coin in a lot of ways, but they're almost cosmic forces more than anything else, really. It's just strange that they're avatars for them. But the Weaver of Time explains to you that basically huge chunks of the Tapestry of Time are missing. And if you recover more Starstones, she can basically tell you who you are, because for whatever reason, you and your counterpart, Source Hunters, are absent from her tapestry, but she believes that if you collect more Starstones, it'll become clear as to who you are and why you're missing from the tapestry. And they think that if you do this, that might help somehow stave off the Void Dragon that is consuming the world, or the end of time, if you will. So from here you can go back to Seal, because you will have activated Rift Travel. This part of the game activates Rift Travel, which basically just lets you hop to waypoints like you can in Original Sin 2 from wherever. You just open up the Rift Travel menu, click on the way shrine you would like to teleport to, and off you go. Now, upon arriving back in Seal, we are met by Arhu, who explains that while he didn't want to tell you this at first, Arhu is actually an agent of Zigzags. They met some time ago, and that they are aware that there is a sect of humans who are involved in some nefarious deeds that are somehow connected to Councillor Jake's murder, which is why he actually summoned you, as opposed to, just a routine investigation of a death. So Arhu explains all of this and basically tells you to keep him posted of anything going on so he can coordinate with Zigzags, basically. Now, he also gives you the teleporter pyramids. Well, at least one of them, which is awesome. Always nice to see those return. Love the teleporter pyramids in classic teleporter pyramid fashion, because this is literally every game they come up in. You only get one. You are instructed to use it to find the other one, because it'll teleport you to it. In this particular case, when you use it, you get teleported into a bathroom where a woman is taking a bath for a little bit of a laugh. So after that awkward thing aside, this is where I have been holding back from you guys a little bit. So this investigation at this point can take a ton of turns in classic Divinity fashion. So depending on who you talk to and what you discover when, this quest can actually take a ton of turns. Now there are, as you might imagine, an optimal couple ways to do things to maximize experience and things like that. And while I'm more or less going to stick to that kind of line of thinking, I just wanted to mention that you can just straight up find things around town that will tell you about this stuff. If you know where important quest items are located, so you've played previously, you can just go pick those up and it'll be like, oh, you were investigating around town and you discovered things. Or you can, for instance, another option you have is to actually talk to Jake's dog in the cemetery, which if you have Pet Pal, you'll learn that that is in fact Jake's dog and that he's staking out his owner's grave. But in talking to him, the dog will mention that it doesn't actually smell like Jake, and then you can dig up Jake's grave, and it turns out that Jake's body isn't in there. And then you can go from there. You can also then bring smelly items back to Jake's dog of the prime suspects, and then Jake's dog will basically tell you whether or not he can smell Jake and is thus related to the crime in any way. But all of those possible options aside, the typically speaking most common thing for you to do at this point would be to go back to investigate the actual crime scene, as you were interrupted in doing so last time. Now, in examining the crime scene here, we can actually discover a note inside a locked chest in the room where the murder happened, and inside is actually a love letter from the Duke of Ferrell to Jake's wife Esmeralda that specifically mentions killing Councillor Jake, which is, as you might imagine, pretty suspicious. And we can confront the Duke of Ferrell directly because he's in the inn. You can talk to him about this. He basically says, I was exaggerating for a poem, obviously, and moving on. From here, because we know that the body is already missing, we can go and speak to Robert the Mortician in town. In theory, where the body should be, right? So if you, before going upstairs of the morgue to actually speak to Robert the Mortician, investigate downstairs, you can find his ledger, which explains that he is very certain that Councillor Jake was murdered, and he gives a list of suspects in this ledger, which include the mayor, because the mayor has keys to all of the shops and things in town and could have stolen stolen Jake's body afterwards. Captain Arias, because Captain Arias was very suspicious after the murder happened and apparently showed up to Robert the Mortician's house super early in the morning the day after the murder. Esmeralda, because of aforementioned affairs and everything else going on, and everyone seems to think she's the prime suspect anyway. And lastly, Evelyn, the local town doctor's apprentice, because she could easily transport a corpse, since again, Jake's body is missing. Now that's basically all the information you can learn from Robert the Mortician. And taking his ledger back to Captain Arias, we can have him arrested if we so choose, because he did kind of cover all of the body snatching stuff up. But we can take this ledger with some incriminating evidence back to Captain Arias and have Robert the Mortician imprisoned. But ultimately, that's pretty useless, because Robert the Mortician, while guilty of some morally interesting crimes, has absolutely not actually killed Councillor Jake, and thus isn't really the subject of this investigation. Now, from here, because of the love letter from the Duke of Ferrell, we can actually go speak to Lady Esmeralda to question her about her husband's murder. Now, she maintains her complete innocence, kind of explains that there is no proof, there's nothing going on, and is incredibly adamant about it if you question her. However, if from here you go upstairs, you can find a key to her shop's back door. Now, if you then go through that back door, you can actually find a book titled The Perfect Murder, as well as a bloody knife in her basement. Once we have all three of these items, we can actually take them to Esmeralda and confront her, where she, once again, is like, first of all, don't appreciate you sneaking around my house, as you might imagine. Second of all, she has an explanation for all of them, says as much, and also herself mentions the fact that Evelyn, the local healer's apprentice, has been seen doing suspicious stuff, and Esmeralda is very certain that while Evelyn maybe didn't actually kill Jake, that she's somehow involved, and basically kind of gives us a lead in that direction. However, before we get to that, we can take all the evidence we found back to Captain Arias and have Esmeralda arrested for killing her husband Jake. However, upon doing this, it's made almost immediately clear afterwards that she's not the murderer, because, as Medora puts it so well if you have her as your companion, despite the fact that the evidence doesn't look good for Esmeralda, and that she was definitely cheating on Councillor Jake, ultimately, she isn't a sorcerer, and Councillor Jake was killed by source magic, as been stated a couple times by a couple different people up to this point. Because obviously you're source hunters, and they called you to investigate a murder involving source. So there's that for you, but you can falsely imprison Esmeralda should you so choose. Now from here, we obviously have one clear-cut lead to follow, and that is Evelyn, the local healer Thelrion's apprentice. I want to mention that the local healer Thelron is actually, I believe, supposed to be the Thelron from Divine Divinity that is causing Mardanus to go insane. I believe this is supposed to be that same character prior to him dying and turning himself into a lich after he moved to the Kingdom of Ferrell. I believe it's supposed to be the same person, which is just a really cool aside. With that out of the way, we can go speak to Thelron and basically ask him where Evelyn went, because if you've already talked to her up to this point, she then disappears, and basically he says that she left in some huge rush, didn't know what it was about, but she left a bag of her belongings in the next room. If you go to that bag of belongings, you can find a key to Evelyn's house. You can then, of course, use this key to go to Evelyn's house, where you can find a bunch of damning evidence that, while it doesn't directly state that she killed Councillor Jake, she clearly took his body if you combine this evidence with the evidence of everything else you find in town. That said, it also reveals the location of her hideout, as well as a reveal spell to reveal the entrance once you get there. So with that, guys, this is going to wrap up part 1 of the full story of Divinity Original Sin. So we found out who the prime suspect in Councillor Jake's murder is, and where to find her after she fled town. And next episode, we are going to investigate that lead outside of Cyseal and see where that leads us. So thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please subscribe, stick around for more, as there's obviously more videos to follow this part 1. But like, comment, subscribe, do all that YouTube stuff. But either way, have a great day. What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you part 2 of our series about the story of Divinity Original Sin. So, last episode we left off by finding the main lead in Cyseal about who murdered Councillor Jake, and we need to go follow up on that. However, first things first, before we jump into anything, if you're interested in joining the channel as a member and supporting all of this content, you can. For $1, you guys get some cool, decent little perks, and I get $1, which really helps the channel grow. So if you'd consider doing that, I'd appreciate it. Moving forward, before we actually get back to the actual story that we're going through, something I didn't mention in last episode because I wanted to start talking about it during this episode, is that in addition to the quest plot lines, there is a bit of a side storyline. Now, in the last episode, we mentioned the End of Time, and we went there and we met Zigzax and the Weaver of Time, and basically found out that we, our partner and I, as Source Hunters, are absent from the Tapestry of Time for whatever reason. Now, as we play through the game and do what the Weaver actually asked us to do, which is come into contact with Starstones, we find, as we find them, that the more of those we find, one each, is that rooms in the Homestead Hall, otherwise known as the End of Time, open up as we find Starstones. So the more we find, the more rooms unlock. So we find this out by finding our first one after our initial trip to the End of Time, because the first one after that trip then unlocks the Hall of Heroes. Finding these and unlocking these rooms is a bit of a twofold reward. So first of all, you actually uncover more of the past of the two Source Hunters, as well as each room having its own specific functionality for you to enjoy. So the Hall of Heroes is arguably one of the more important ones, and being the first room you unlock, that's pretty convenient. So what the Hall of Heroes actually does is, up to this point, if you take one of the extra companions that isn't a source, like one of the main two Source Hunters, like Jhon or Wolgraf or somebody, and you dismiss them from your party, they actually just go back to wherever you found them originally. However, once you have the Hall of Heroes unlocked, instead of going back to their original point, they just get teleported to the Hall of Heroes, which makes them super easy to recruit because they're all in like a little lined up position. Now, when we first unlock this particular room, we run into a sort of Sprigany looking type woman named Astarte, which we know by hovering over her. Now, she makes some vague allusions to knowing who we are, and that somehow we deceived her in some way and then left. So this is important later. It's intentionally vague at the moment, but this meeting is important, which is why I wanted to mention it. Now, up to this point of the story, we do have the ability to find one more Starstone and unlock the second room. I forget the actual name. I think it's like Inner Sanctum or something is the name of the second room. But basically, it is a bedroom of sorts where our two Source Hunters, it would seem, used to stay at one point in time. And moreover, this particular room actually has a magic mirror in it, which, if you're familiar with Original Sin 2 at all, allows you to respec and redo your character's cosmetic options. So that is something that was in Original Sin as well. And getting the second Starstone after the initial one will unlock this room, which gives you access to the mirror. Now, in this room, we meet a second character called the Trife. The Trife, fun fact, he's referred to as a demon, but he's often, it would almost seem that he's the Void in some way, like a Void Woken of some sort. Because if you talk to the Weaver of Time after this, she actually specifically mentions the Trife as like the father of the Void, which is especially interesting given what we know from Original Sin 2. So either they retconned this a little bit and decided to just like, pull back the Trife's meaningfulness, or he's just straight up the father of the Void itself, which I find hard to believe given that we know the God Kings thing. So I think this is something that winds up being retconned, if I'm just being real with you guys. But nonetheless, the Trife is referred to as the father of the Void by the Weaver of Time. The Trife is the counterpart, if you will, to the woman we met earlier, Astarte. So the Trife is not a good person, as you might imagine, by being the father of the Void. He and Astarte seem to have a bit of a weird relationship where they're not killing each other, but they definitely don't get along, so that's interesting. Obviously, we don't have any more Starstones, as I just mentioned, so we do have to put this particular story on pause and get on with the other part of the story, which is tracking down Councillor Jake's murderer. So, as we found out in the last episode, Evelyn, our main suspect, has ran off to a secluded beach hideaway that she mentions in her diary, and we have to go find it. Now, in talking to a couple people about this lead, and also just exploring ourselves, we find out that in order to reach this secluded beach, we need to go through a cave north of Sicil. So, The cave itself is easy enough to find. There's a few annoying fights when you get there, but essentially go north of Cyseal for long enough and you're going to find this cave. When you get in the cave is when the fun begins. As you walk down the path, you run into 3 adventurers who talk about the Fabulous Five and how they were deceived. So the Fabulous Five is a sort of mercenary group that you can meet in Cyseal. Technically, it's part of a side quest, but you literally have to go through this cave, and this cave is thus part of that side quest as well, so you kind of have to interact with this at least a little bit. So the Fabulous Five are, again, a bit of a mercenary group. What they've been doing is actually hiring people who don't have any experience and sending them off to do dangerous mercenary work. And then, when through sheer number of these idiots that get sent to basically be killed doing this various mercenary work, eventually succeed through sheer number, the Fabulous Five collect their reward and skip town without ever actually rewarding the people they sent to die and then whoever happens to complete it. So in this particular case, the Fabulous Five were sending people to this cave to attack something called the Sparkmaster 5000. So what I haven't mentioned about Arhu up to this point is, in addition to being a wizard and a guy who transforms into a cat at times, he is actually also very adept with magical engineering. And he likes to create magical technologies that are usually weaponish in nature. Now, if you've played Original Sin 2, again, you'll know that because that's a huge part of the plot towards the end of the game. In this particular case, I'm speaking about 2 instances. One, Arhu is responsible for the magical ballistae that are protecting Cyseal from the undead plague that is going around, which we'll get to here in just a minute. We'll circle back to that part. And then he's also responsible for having made the Sparkmaster 5000. Now, this fight can be difficult, but also really easy if you've done your background and research. So, up to this point, you can actually go and talk to Arhu about this if you find out about it before you leave Cyseal, and he can give you a remote that will just straight up skip the Sparkmaster 5000's turns if you put the right combinations in. So you can literally just shut the Sparkmaster 5000 down and make this a super easy fight. But all that aside, once you've got this done, if any of the people of the Fabulous Five mercenary group survive, you can send them back to town and protect them, yay. But either way, once you go back and talk to the Fabulous, or try to talk to the Fabulous Five, you find out they're missing, and then if you go talk to the mayor, he says he gave them the reward for this, and then they just bailed, as I just mentioned a little bit ago. So once we're done with this, we can continue through the cave, exit the cave, and come to the secluded beach, which is where we need to be. Now, in order to get to the part of the beach where we need to use the reveal spell we found in Evelyn's house to reveal the hidden lair she's been hiding in, we need to make our way, of course, down the beach. Now, there are 2 fights in particular to look out here. There are a couple side quest things going on, but again, I'm not really covering a lot of that in depth. There is one I do have to mention. There's a guy called Dietmar, something like that. He is part of a side quest, and technically, if you talk to him, he does say he is here protecting Evelyn's hideaway. However, you can completely skip this fight. I only mention it because he specifically says he's guarding Evelyn's hideaway, but despite that, you can totally just walk around this whole group of people and not engage them at all. Second of all, we have the Sunbather near where we actually need to use the reveal spell. Now, there is a guy just kind of sunbathing over here near where we need to use the reveal spell at. This is probably one of the funniest boss fights in the game. I really enjoy it. So if you talk to this guy, he openly admits to being a sorcerer, which, we're source hunters, weird thing to admit. You can either talk to him and engage combat directly, you can hit him and engage combat. If you use the reveal spell for Evelyn's hideaway, he attacks you again. So basically, this is a boss fight, and there's just you're not going to get around this guy. You're going to have to fight him. However, he's actually really funny because, he's in his boxers. He turns invisible, summons a bunch of sand golem type things, but he's not a super hard guy. The main thing is when he's invisible, if you use an AoE spell to reveal him and focus on him and kill him, all of his golems will die. That's really the best tactic. Also, if you're careful, you can drop something heavy on him or, sneak up on him before you start engaging and talking to him and just kill him outright if you know there's a fight coming. But if it's your first time running into him, obviously it's going to be a little difficult. Now, once this guy who is guarding our entrance is dead, we can use our reveal spell to, of course, reveal the entrance to Evelyn's hideaway and then, of course, enter. From here, we enter into the hideaway, and the first thing we run into is a guard with basically no health who's clearly in a weakened state who tries to alert everyone else, but you killed that person. and then she will usually have the key to the door, and by usually I mean she should, unless the game glitches. She'll have the key to the door up ahead. Now, once you walk up towards that door, you'll find 4 orcs, well, typically 4, depending on the difficulty you're on, who are banging on that door and asking to be let in, and ultimately being ignored by the cultists inside. Now, the orcs, once you go up and talk to them, you can actually convince them to just leave through charm and stuff if you have the stats to pass that check. Otherwise, you have to fight these orcs and kill them, open the door into the next room, which is actually filled with weakened cultists. However, you can, if you are careful, just walk through this room without disturbing any of them, which your source hunters will actually mention in their little dialogue out loud. They'll say that these people seem super distracted with what they're doing, and if you just cut right, you can totally skip all of this, which I recommend because there's a ton of them. It's ridiculous. And then once we get out of that room and go down the stairs, we come to the woman we saw on the beach when we first arrived in Cyseal, known as the Conduit, speaking to Evelyn. Now, this conversation right here between us, Evelyn, and the Conduit is a very revealing conversation. We learn a ton of stuff from this. So the gist of it is, Evelyn did not kill Jake. She only stole his body and is trying to resurrect him to learn what it is that the Conduit entrusted Councillor Jake with. Because we also learned that Councillor Jake is actually working for the Conduit. And the Conduit is basically a prophet for a new religious order known as the Immaculates. Now, up to this point of the game, we do not know what the Immaculates are actually trying to do, so I'm obviously not going to reveal that here. But we learn all of that from this conversation. And in addition to that, we also find out that the Conduit is absolutely not happy with Evelyn because Evelyn again stole Jake's body to have him resurrected to find out what he knows. Now the Conduit obviously just tells Evelyn to kill us all because Evelyn ultimately created this mess by absconding with Jake's body and resurrecting him, and thus drawing your attention here, which the Conduit absolutely did not want. Now from here, we actually have to fight Evelyn. Now on the first round of this combat, she will summon several guards. This is probably the first challenging fight of the game, I would say, typically. So she will summon 2 fiery dogs in addition to her guards, and those dogs actually explode when they die. So if you focus on them when all of the enemies are still grouped up, you can actually do a ton of damage to everyone by getting those ram things to explode near everyone, enemy-wise. So that can be a good strategy. But regardless, once Evelyn lies dead and you can carry on, you can actually talk to Councillor Jake because Evelyn successfully resurrected him. And now he has become Zombie Jake, which is of course a reference to the Zombie Jake in Divine Divinity as well as Divinity 2. Now, because of how far away Cyseal actually is from the Dukedom of Ferrell where Divine Divinity takes place, as well as some of Divinity 2, you can't definitively say that this is the Zombie Jake from those games, or if it's just a reference. So, hard to say if this is literally the guy, because timeline-wise, this is 1,200 years before either of those games, so it's possible, somewhere in his zombie life, he just moved over to those lands. So this might literally be that Zombie Jake, but we're not 100% sure on that. Now, a cool thing you learn from this conversation is basically what happened the night of Councillor Jake's murder. So it turns out that Councillor Jake is actually also working for the Conduit because of his obsession with the Starstones that we're trying to find for the Weaver of Time. He collects them, and as it turns out, they can be transformed into something called a Bloodstone. Now, the Bloodstones are made basically by killing tons of people, which again we learned from this little interaction here, and that they have incredibly potent healing powers after this is done. Now, we don't know why they're being made or anything like that, but we know that the Immaculates are trying to make Starstones into Bloodstones, and that for whatever reason it seems nefarious and it involves tons of sorcerers, which is why it's of interest to us source hunters. So from here, Councillor Jake goes on to detail exactly what happened with his murder. That basically, the Conduit asked Councillor Jake to accompany him, or her rather, to the inn, the King Crab Inn, where Councillor Jake died. Now, the Conduit, a woman otherwise known as Leandra, by the way, which again we learned from this conversation, meets with a hooded figure at the King Crab Inn. And he basically describes his experience guarding this person. And for whatever reason, that meeting turns sour. Leandra rushes out of this room and basically tells Councillor Jake to kill the man on the ground inside, which Councillor Jake goes to do. And in his attempt to do this, to kill that person laying on the ground, he is then murdered by Leandra's twin sister, Ikara. We learn this directly from Councillor Jake himself. The person who actually murdered Councillor Jake was none of our suspects. It was Leandra's sister, Ikara, otherwise known as the White Witch. Now, at first, it might sound like, a pretty terrible thing that this White Witch, who's supposedly a good person, totally murdered Councillor Jake, but then remember the context of this conversation. Councillor Jake is totally admitting to being a cultist and was literally in the act of trying to murder someone. That is why Councillor Jake died. Peppered into this conversation and the previous one with Evelyn and the Conduit, they actually mention the Source King Baracus Rex, which as far as I know is the first reference of Baracus Rex in any of the games. Now, what the Conduit and the Immaculates are actually trying to do in and around Cyseal is resurrect Baracus Rex. The problem is they're only just now trying to basically get a pinned down location of where Baracus Rex was actually buried. So because of this, they had actually been plaguing Cyseal with undead for the last couple of years, which is a big part of the subplots going on around Cyseal, is all these undead attacking, as I mentioned earlier. Now from here, with all this information, we can actually head back to town and run into Arhu, who will go on to explain who Ikara actually is. He will mention a woman named Cassandra, who we have yet to meet, and that basically he tells us we can do basically two things. We can track down Ikara in the Luculla forest to the north of us and basically get her side of the story and try to see what else is going on there, because ultimately she did still murder a guy and there's still questions about why and what is the Conduit trying to do. And also we can handle the more pressing problem of these people trying to resurrect Baracus Rex nearby Cyseal, which we can then track down and deal with as well. So for our next episode, we are probably going to look into tracking down Baracus Rex, since that is a big part of the story, and frankly, I just think it's awesome because it's Baracus Rex, the Source King, the Tyrant, the guy. So there you go, guys. That is going to wrap up episode 2 of the full story of Divinity Original Sin. So, with that in mind, again, just remember, next episode, we're going to look into defeating Baracus Rex after he is resurrected by the Immaculates, because they believe they have found his body nearby under a church, which we learned from Arhu. So, there you go, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please like, comment, subscribe, stick around, all that YouTubey jazz. But thank you so much for watching, and have a great day. What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you part 3 of our full story of Divinity Original Sin. So, last episode we left off by finding exactly who killed Councillor Jake, and we also picked up a couple leads exploring the larger plot behind his murder and basically all the things going on surrounding that, and all the suspicious stuff going on with the cult that we have been running into whilst investigating this murder. Now, last episode, we mentioned that the next thing we were probably going to do is try to track down Baracus Rex's tomb and basically stop the cult of Immaculates that we mentioned earlier from resurrecting Baracus. To that end, we need to explore the eastern side of the map. Now, this is where the higher level enemies are. There are a couple things we can do before we jump straight into the church where we believe Baracus to be buried. So, if you do a little exploring, there is an imp trap workshop we can explore, and on the other side of that we can run into one of the minions that has been raised by a mysterious necromancer that has been causing the undead problems. His name is Diedrich. As it turns out, he is actually the old general of Baracus's armies. Now, I mentioned this guy because from this conversation we can actually learn that a necromancer has been resurrecting people with the intent of resurrecting Baracus Rex. So whoever this necromancer is that's doing this is directly working for the Conduit and trying to further her goals for some secret that Baracus apparently knows. That's all things we can learn from this conversation. Another part of the map you can explore is actually a burning ruins near the churchyard itself that is actually caused by one of the undead abominations that has been raised that is called the Twins Joined by Fire, which is basically just a fire monstrosity. It doesn't talk, there is no dialogue to be had here, but it's just another one of the minions that's been raised. You can kill it, move on. but being optional, you can actually just completely ignore this one if you wanted to, but killing it for the XP is of course recommended. Now the last thing I want to mention before we actually get to where Baracus is being held is that there is a small hut just north of the area in which we fight Diedrich. So this particular hut is important because if we arrive here before we go to the church, we can either pick the lock or destroy the door and avoid a few traps to read a bunch of notes from none other than Thelrion from the village, the healer from the village, that is. So these notes and things explain a ton about Thelrion's kind of backstory and what his goals were. So it turns out that the healer in town is actually also working for the Conduit, but not so much as a subservient person, if that makes sense. So Thelrion had enough intelligence to realize that while the Conduit is definitely not the prophet she's masquerading as, he understands that she is still very powerful and that he has things he can learn from her. Because Thelrion's goal, from reading these diaries, we can find out, is to give a true second life to his love who passed away, Malia. Now, while Thelrion has been dabbling in necromancy and has thus discovered the power of the bloodstones that we mentioned from the last episode as well, on his own, he also knows that he doesn't know enough about them to give someone a true second life, which is considered the ultimate power of the bloodstones, really. Because up to this point, all he can really resurrect is like skeletons and things. And basically, we read from these diaries again, the Conduit and Thelrion came to an agreement that basically the Conduit would give this information to Thelrion if Thelrion could find and raise Baracus Rex from the dead in order to learn what Baracus knows about breaking a soul forge, which is, of course, important. But the specifics on why we'll get to a little later. So that's all information we can find totally before we go to the abandoned churchyard. Once all that's wrapped up, I recommend actually doing any quests or anything like that, side quest wise, leveling up that you can do around the area first, because the fight with Baracus is difficult. He's kind of like the main boss of the first area of the game. And after we kill and defeat him, eventually we'll be moving on to Luculla Forest, which was the other lead we received after dealing with Evelyn and Councillor Jake. That being to head to Luculla Forest and track down the White Witch Akara. But before we get to there, we are at the churchyard. So you actually have to walk around the church in a clockwise fashion in order to reach the entrance. So you're basically walking through a graveyard, and yes, you can totally dig up all the graves. There's actually a quest or two involved in that, mostly just involving unlocking some chests, and then there's like some ghosts you can talk to, for instance, that kind of thing. There is a fun fight in the middle of this graveyard where you have to fight the crazed graveyard caretaker, and he summons a ton of exploding skeletons who will do crazy damage to the oil and poison barrels all around them and cause just hilarious explosions. It's a fun fight. It's not meant to be difficult. Like, truth be told, if you sneak up on this guy and kill, just hit, ignite one of the barrels that he's standing next to, you can kill this dude pretty much immediately. But it's just kind of a fun fight that kind of explores some of the mechanics that are used by Divinity Original Sin's combat system, so it's just kind of a fun little thing you can do. I've always enjoyed this fight personally, always gotten a good laugh out of it, so I wanted to mention it. But once we've had our fun in the church graveyard and we've made our way around to the entrance, upon clicking on the door, we are immediately stopped by the statues actually on the outside of the door. Now, I actually do not like this interaction personally, because they explain that only people who are dedicated to the Immaculate's cause basically are allowed inside the church. They test you on your knowledge of this because they can tell you're not part of the Immaculate just by looking at you, apparently. And the part I don't like is the question they ask you, you as a character would know the answer to, just fundamentally. It's the Conduit. Basically, they just ask who the prophet is and what does she go by in her pursuit of whatever goddess it is that the Immaculates actually worship. So, to this end, it's like my two characters, any two characters up to this point in the game, like unless you came to the church first before you knew any of that, that would be the only time you don't know it. But even if we've dealt with all this other stuff first, we know the Conduit's name, we can't just tell these guys it's the Conduit. We roll a persuasion check that the game uses, and it goes off of that whether or not you succeed, which I just don't think, it's like I know empirically what the answer is. Why can't I just answer it? So I just think that's kind of a strange interaction I don't really care for. But 9 out of 10, you're going to wind up fighting these guys. They have a high defense stat, as you might imagine, being statues, but they're not super hard. You can usually beat them with no problem. But that brings us to the inside of the church, where we immediately run into none other than the Conduit herself and several of her Immaculate followers, clearly having killed several people in this desecrated church. But basically from this conversation with the Conduit, we can learn that obviously she's planning on resurrecting Baracus, but more importantly what her larger goal with the cult of this Immaculate religion is actually going for, which is essentially oblivion for all of Rivellon in the name of peace. Like basically saying that if everything is dead and gone, everything is inherently at peace, which is a twisted way of looking at things, but nonetheless that's her goal. So from here, she runs off down below to presumably resurrect Baracus, or, talk to him or do whatever it is, but she disappears down below. So from here, what we can do is, of course, kill her Immaculate followers, and then in Thelrion's hut as well, we actually learn the secret of how to open the altar back up where she disappeared to, because she disappeared down the stairs and then locked the altar above the stairs behind her. But if you picked up the notes in Thelrion's hut that I mentioned, you can actually find out that all you got to do is click on the portraits around the room, revealing 4 buttons. Click those 4 buttons, and then it will unlock the door down below. So once we get down below the altar and actually explore a little bit, we run almost immediately into Thelrion, who explains his side of the story. Again, if we found all of these notes and everything, we should already know most of the information he talks about. But more specifically, he likes to tell you about what it is he was trying to ascertain from Baracus Rex. So the whole reason he was trying to resurrect Baracus Rex was to learn how to break a soul forge. Now this is incredibly important to Leandra, otherwise known as the Conduit, because she is actually soul forged to her twin sister Ikara, and they are 2 very different people who are trying to accomplish 2 very different things, and being soul forged to each other is a real hassle for them. Now, if you don't know what a soul forge is, basically they can feel each other's emotions and wants. Perhaps more importantly, if one of them dies, so does the other one, which, as you can imagine, for 2 people who do not share the same goals at all, it can be quite the hassle. Now, Baracus Rex is considered one of the couple of masters of Soulforge magic, and he apparently knows a way to break soul forges permanently. Now, this is the whole reason, of course, that Thelrion was trying to resurrect Baracus Rex, an endeavor he ultimately succeeded in. However, Baracus Rex being the Source King, the tyrant, like the literal, as far as brutal tyrants go, he's the pinnacle. There were literally wars waged to kill this guy, which is the entire reason the Source Hunter Academy that we belong to exists. Armies were raised to kill this dude. As you might imagine, when Thelrion asked Baracus what the secret was, Baracus wasn't inclined to help because he's a terrible guy, and he just killed Thelrion outright. Well, mortally injured him so we could talk to him, and then he died. Now, in the next room is none other than Baracus Rex. So, we can talk to him before we actually fight him, of course, which isn't a huge surprise. So, basically, he tells us much of the information we already know. He was resurrected to Leandra with her Soulforge problem. He pretty much knows that's what she wants. He flat out refuses to help because he's the Source King, and he doesn't have to, basically. Most of his conversation is telling you about how he died, even, so if that's something you're interested in, it's pretty cool. He does not like the fact that you are source hunters, but he also, like many of the more demigod divine beings that we tend to keep running into, can tell immediately that you 2 are more than just source hunters, as has been stated to us several times by a couple different people at this point. That's really all the unique stuff he has. He doesn't really tell us anything we don't already know. Just kind of goes into detail about what Ikara wants, just his perspective of things, really. And lastly, if we mention Cassandra, because Arhu mentioned Cassandra to us, to Baracus, he explains that Cassandra was his sister, and that Arhu and his sister used to basically serve him, which was many years ago. That's pretty much all we can learn from him. From here, it's just a fight. So he summons the 3 undead lieutenants that you can find around Syciel. 2 of them I've mentioned, Diedrich and the twins joined by fire. There is another one called the Ghoul that guards the lighthouse that I didn't mention specifically until just now, but he summons those 3 to fight. But the real problem you're going to find with Baracus is that he starts the fight, if you're too close to him, by casting a level 15 spell called Meteor Strike that at this level on Tactician mode even can just straight up kill your whole party. So basically, the easiest way that I've found to do this personally, and that several guides actually recommend doing, is send one person in to talk to him and initiate combat, and then immediately rush back to the doorway leading into his room. And for whatever reason, Baracus himself will refuse to actually walk down there to the doorway, but all three of his minions that he just summoned will actually swarm the doorway, making them easier to kill. So you can kill his minions and then deal with him separately, just because for whatever reason he refuses to go past a certain point in that room. So that's probably the easiest way to deal with him if you happen to be having trouble. So there you go, guys. That is how to kill Baracus Rex. But, however, we are not done yet. Once we've killed Baracus, looted his room, gotten, all of that done, and we head back to town, we are immediately met by Arhu, who expresses his great relief that Baracus Rex is finally dead. Again. So, Arhu goes on to explain his side of the story, that yes, he did used to serve Baracus Rex because he was friends with Baracus' sister, Cassandra, who was apparently a sweet girl who had, just barely turned 18 when they met. I don't remember if I mentioned up to this point or not, but Cassandra and Baracus Rex were actually soul forged together, and much of the experimentation Baracus did on finding out how to break soul forges was due to this specifically. Now, because of this, obviously Baracus would never kill his sister Cassandra despite being a huge tyrant, so he would basically just torture Arhu and Cassandra whenever he felt like it. Was kind of more what was happening. And at some point, Baracus decided, in order to, one of the ways apparently that you can break a Soul Forge, is to turn one of the persons in the Soul Forge into a lich. Apparently that just breaks the spell by the nature of the lich never being able to die. So Baracus forcibly turned his sister Cassandra into a lich, and using this happening, Arhu actually took the opportunity to escape his sort of imprisonment between Baracus and his sister. And according to him, he never really looked back, though he always felt sorry for Cassandra, of course, because once this happened, she was never really the same afterwards, as you might imagine, because she had just turned into a lich, and they're notoriously bloodthirsty. So that is Arhu's side of things. Once this is dealt with, again, we only really have the one lead, and that is heading up to talk and find and talk to the White Witch Akara in the Luculla Forest. But before we wrap up this video, in killing Baracus, we actually find another Starstone in his room. So this unlocks another room for you in the Homestead Hall, otherwise known as the End of Time. And this particular one gives us the last Starstone we need to get the first piece of the Source Hunter's history, because again, it's mentioned that they are more than they appear to be.
New portion of history appears to us for the first time in not even I know how long. Let us look together. Let us see what the Weaver has woven.
Long ago, two great generals led mankind in a terrible war. The dreaded Void Dragon threatened all of existence, and man and gods alike joined swords to stop it. The two generals were celebrated as the rulers of all, and even the gods paid them tribute.
And as the cinematic will have revealed to you, the two Source Hunters we're playing used to be generals of great renown, in none other than the war against Baracus himself. And in fact, they did such an amazing job during this war that they were basically made leaders afterwards of this empire, or whatever it happened to be considered at the time. And that's the little bit of history we can uncover, again, as the cinematic has of course shown you at this point. That, guys, is where we're going to wrap up this particular episode of the full story of Divinity Original Sin. Next time, of course, we are going to start exploring Luculla Forest to the north of Cyseal, and seeing if we can't track down the White Witch and what that entails, so we can learn her side of the story and some more information on what's going on with the Cult of the Immaculates. Because as Arhu himself puts it, we have foiled one of the Conduit's plans, as she was very clearly interested in breaking the Soul Forge between her and her sister, but whatever the Conduit's larger plot is to hasten the void, shall we say, has yet to be uncovered. With that, guys, I'm going to leave you. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But thank you so much for watching, and have a great day. What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you part 4 of our full story of Divinity Original Sin. So, last episode, we defeated Baracus Rex, resurrected by Thelbrion, the village healer, and pretty much wrapped up everything that we needed to do in Cyseal. So we move on to the second portion of the game, the Luculla Forest at this point. So in order to get to Luculla Forest, you pretty much just go straight north of Cyseal, near where we fought the twins joined by fire. There is a roaming tree enemy of sorts that kind of blocks your path, but if you were able to kill Baracus Rex, this guy should not be a problem. So you can kind of just clear him out and then head up the path, and you will hit another waste shrine, as well as some dead Immaculate cultists who will usually have a starstone with them if you haven't picked it up already, and then you'll unlock another room in your homestead, but we'll get back to that part later. So upon entering Luculla Forest, which we do hit a loading screen for that, so it loads a separate area in. Upon entering Luculla Forest, we immediately run into Arhu. Arhu interrupts us and tells us that Akara's cabin is nearby and we need to focus on finding her first. That's obviously very important because that's really our only reason for being in Luculla Forest at this point, is finding out what is going on with Akara. From here, just to let you guys know, you can go investigate the town of Silverglen and kind of use that as a town hub and kind of do a few side quests here and there, that kind of thing. However, in Luculla Forest, the levels are very strict. Like, if you don't do this more or less in the order they want you to do it in, the level curve is going to beat you to death. With that in mind, I highly recommend, if you just get to Luculla Forest, to do the part with Akara first. So obviously that's where we're going to follow anyway, because that's where the narrative is leading us. But like, going to Silverglen and getting lost in side quests and trying to go other places is not recommended. With that in mind, we can head towards Akara's hut. On our way to Akara's hut, we're going to run into a guy called the Immaculate's High Summoner. Now, when we talk to him the first time, there is a chance to persuade him to just let us investigate the cabin and leave us alone. However, it's pretty likely you're going to wind up fighting this guy. He summons a bunch of Voidwoken, and ultimately you have to kill him himself around Akara's hut. When we finish that, when we get to Akara's hut, actually see it, it's surrounded by a big barrier. Now, in order to break this barrier, you basically have to look around, and there are two mushrooms you can talk to nearby called Mushroom Akari. And basically they're magical mushrooms that Akara has been growing out here in the forest that she guards. So basically, you have to either kill or talk to this mushroom to get it to give you the spell to pull down the barrier. Now, it will ask you a series of 3 riddles, which are pretty easy to answer, and then it will give you the spell. If you mess that up, you have to kill the mushroom to get the spell. So that's pretty much how it goes. Now, once you're inside the cabin, the only thing really important here is that there is a giant mirror, and you need to use that mirror to be teleported to a cavern below the cabin itself. In this cabin, our important thing is to navigate it, and as we walk by pools, a voice will start calling out to us and telling us to basically navigate the cavern towards the back, and eventually we'll hit a lake, an area that overlooks a lake, and the voice will call out to us again telling us that we need to get to the lake. Now, while we're doing this, we can run into an imp, and this imp's voice is so annoying. Like, none of them are especially great as far as imp voices go, but I don't know why, but this guy's voice just grates on my ears. But that said, the imp will explain basically what happened to Akara. That she came back to the cabin after everything that happened in Cyseal and was basically abducted by Immaculate cultists and brought to a place called Hyberheim, which is an alternate dimension that can be accessed through the lake, which has been turned into a rift to Hyberheim. So much like Nemesis is an alternate realm, Hyberheim is like a fairy realm of sorts. Now, this conversation is basically echoed by the enemy guarding the lake, Valiana, I guess is how you pronounce that. She will tell you basically the same thing, that Akara was taken to Hyberheim to be punished or, held indefinitely, and that she's not going to let you pass. And then, of course, you have to fight Valiana to gain access to Hyberheim by reading a spell at the lake. So once we get inside Hyberheim, we need to follow the voices that's coming out of the Sentinel statues. Now, there are going to be a couple fights with some, mechanical imp rodents, that kind of thing. Once you navigate this path, you'll eventually run into a woman named Almina. Now, in talking to Almina, it turns out that Almina is actually Akara's apprentice, and she will explain that the reason the fairy realm is so out of sorts, and the reason you're having to fight all this stuff on your way there, is that King Boreas, the elemental lord of winter, has taken control of a fairy realm typically ruled by 4 elemental lords. All of this changed when the Conduit contacted King Boreas and traded him a staff of elemental power in exchange for a giant starstone that had fallen in the fairy realm. And in addition to this, he also gave her hundreds of imps to be slaughtered to power this starstone into a huge bloodstone. They're not sure what she was using it for, but that's what happened. So using the staff of elemental power, King Boreas managed to trap all the other elemental lords and has basically thrown the entire realm into a frozen wasteland because he's the Winter King. As we start exploring Hyberheim, we're going to notice that there are Immaculates pretty much everywhere, and eventually we're likely to run into a prison imp or King Boreas' castle. Now, we can't get into King Boreas' castle right now because it's guarded by a barrier that we need to find a way past. Now, if you keep exploring, you're going to eventually run into an imp who is surrounded by dead imps and dead Immaculates. And if you talk to him, he thinks you're there to kill him to start with. But basically he explains that what I just mentioned already, just in more detail, that the Conduit has been murdering imps to power the Starstone. And he will tell you a way into the castle to find Akara, where she's being held, because he also tells you that she's being held in King Boreas' castle, which we basically knew already. He tells you that in exchange for learning how to access where she is, he needs you to head north to a elemental forge that is part of the realm and basically kill all the Immaculates there. Once we head to the elemental forge northeastish of where we are, we can fight a ton of Immaculates out front. This is actually a difficult fight if you don't know what you're doing, because there's just a ton of enemies you have to fight right here at the entrance to the forge. Now, once you get inside, we learn that basically what we already know again. We run into the Conduit herself in the middle of finishing charging the giant starstone that she had gotten from here, and that she had killed 100 of imps to power this thing. Now, this is an important conversation with the Conduit because this is where she concedes that she is not a prophet for this goddess that she keeps pretending to be, and that basically she's lying to the Immaculates to further her own goals. So we learned that from this conversation, technically, if you didn't already realize that's what was happening. She also explains that she gave Boreas the staff, and all of that, again, information we can have already picked up at this point. Once you finish this fight, it's not with the Conduit herself. She turns the 4 Immaculate people with her into demons of sorts, and once you beat them, you can pick up a scroll to open the castle nearby. However, we're not going to do that just yet. We can go down to the imp that we just talked to, who can reveal the location of the secret entrance into Boreas' prison where Akara is being held. Now, before we actually go into that prison to rescue Akara, you should really kill King Boreas first. So in order to rescue Akara, you have to kill King Boreas. So you can go to the prison and find Akara first. You can totally do that, but it's going to be a waste of time until Boreas is dead, because he has to be dead in order for you to free Akara. Once we go to Boreas' castle and use the scroll we got from the conversation with the Conduit, that fight, to open the way to Boreas, we can then of course kill him. He drops an elemental staff. Now, upon picking this staff up, the elemental lords trapped inside are going to talk to us and basically tell us that if we take the staff to the elemental forge from earlier, it can be broken, thus releasing the other 3 elemental lords. Now, the elemental lord of fire, Sua, offers to help us free Akara if we can find her. So once we go then explore the prison, find her, we can talk to Sua, who will teleport there once we use a rune near Akara, to teleport into Boreas' prison, and then use his incredible power as the Lord of Fire to melt the ice that Akara has been trapped in this entire time. And you can't break this ice any other way, so you have to get Lord Sua to help you. Once Akara is released, she explains exactly what happened with Councillor Jake's murder. So she actually has this awesome cutscene to say about it. So here's this.
One night, as I slept, I had a sudden revelation. No dream, but a vision. My sister Leandra and my lover Zandalor. I didn't understand, but I recognized their location. Syceel's King Crab Inn. I arrived and looked through their window, but inside, everything was wrong. Leandra had fled, and Councillor Jake stood over the wizard, a knife in his hand and hate in his eyes. As I watched, he drove the dagger deep into Zandalor's heart, and I was too late to stop him. In that moment, I broke. I saw before me not a man, not even a beast, but evil incarnate. And I used Source to slay him. On the floor lay Zandalor. In my hands, I held Jake's life force. I had sworn never to use Source, but I couldn't walk away. And so I did the unthinkable. I used the Councillor's life to save Zandalor's. He was alive, but only just. Betrayal. Murder. Source. We were all of us guilty now.
So this is a pretty great cutscene and conversation, actually, because it explains that Leandra, Ikara, and Zandalor, as you learned from the trailer, have actually been together for a long time. So Zandalor found these two wild children, basically, whose parents were killed by source hunters, and he trains them in the way of the source because he knows that they're potent in it. And in doing this, he and Ikara start a relationship and become lovers. And when it turns out that Ikara and Zandalor have fallen in love, Leandra, of course, reacts very poorly and runs off and isn't heard from in 2 years. So 2 years later, when the game starts just about, Zandalor meets with Leandra in the King Crab Inn, which is, of course, how Councillor Jake winds up getting killed because he's basically cheating on Ikara. And from here, of course, the game starts, and we're basically caught up with what's going on. Now, at this point, we can all head back to the end of time, where we can meet up with Ikara again, and she can kind of explain what her next move is. Ikara, again, after explaining everything going on between her, Leandra, and Zandalor, is explaining that Leandra, her sister, otherwise known as the Conduit, has been stockpiling resources at a nearby mine in Luculla Forest. Now, she doesn't know what it involves. Using the soul forge between the two, which Ikara explains has been frayed and is starting to break, she knows that Leandra is stockpiling things there because she still gets flashes of what Leandra is up to. So, using that information, we can, of course, deduce that the next thing we need to do is go see what Leandra is doing in these mines nearby. And, given what we already know about the fact that she powered up this giant bloodstone using all of these hundreds of imps, whatever it is, it probably isn't good and probably involves that starstone in some way. With that, we are going to wrap up this particular episode of the full story of Divinity Original Sin. However, before I actually leave you guys, at this point we should have gathered enough starstones and bloodstones to unlock the next piece of the Source Hunters backstory, if you will, kind of explaining why it is everyone keeps referring to them as eternal beings, Ikara included. After this, we get the starstones together. The Weaver, of course, reweaves a portion of the Tapestry of Time, thus releasing another portion of our history back to us, and we get this awesome cinematic.
After the war was won, the Void Dragon remained a great threat to all existence. And so, upon the anvil of creation, the God Box was crafted. The void was locked within, but still the question remained: who would guard the box? The two generals offered themselves. They would give up life and glory to stand sentinel. Transformed into immortal beings, they would be the Void's eternal guardians. They placed the box and the guardians in the first garden, home of Astarte and of the world's most beautiful power, Source. For time immemorial, the guardians stood by the God Box, no longer human in body or in mind, but duty personified.
So from this cinematic, we learn that after the generals had led the battle against the Void Dragon, in which they helped the gods, they were of course revered and thanked for their duty, and the gods created the God Box to contain the Void. But they needed someone to guard that box, and the two generals, our two source hunters, volunteered for that position. And the gods turned them into eternal demigodish beings and had them forever guard the box. As the cinematic puts it, they became duty personified. And it changed them. They were no longer mortal, or their minds weren't even mortal at that point. There's some more cool history for you guys. Our next episode of this series is going to be exploring what Leandra is doing in the Luculla mines, because again, it's important to follow the narrative in Luculla Forest because the levels are very set in stone. Like, I do not recommend deviating from this because you're setting yourself up for a bad time. Luculla Mines, next episode. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube stuff. But have a fantastic day either way. What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you episode 5 of our Divinity Original Sin walkthrough full story of sorts. So in our previous episode, we rescued Ikara from Hyberheim and the clutches of King Boreas, and she filled us in on some of the story, again, as you can see in the previous episode, if you so choose. But right now, she directs us to the Luculla Mines, where her sister Leandra, otherwise known as the Conduit, has been stockpiling resources, and where she took off to after she fueled the massive bloodstone she got from Hyberheim. At the beginning of this series, I mentioned that I wasn't going to cover a lot of side quests. However, for this particular part of the game, I would be remiss not to cover about 3 of them right here. So the entire point of covering them in this particular instance is the fact that they give us context into what we're walking into in the mine. So nearby where Ikara's hut was and we entered Hyberheim is actually the town of Silverglen, which truthfully, if you were playing the game, you probably would have been to already. So there are about 3 particular side quests that we can pick up in town that give us context to what is going on at the mines before we actually head over there. We can speak to a woman named Nadia and find out that her husband died of a disease called the rot. And she believes that the head of the Miners Guild, Lawrence, at least here in town, not the entire guild, knew that the substance they were mining in those mines, known as tenebrium, was causing the rot, and basically told the miners to keep mining anyway, and she feels that her husband died as a result of Lawrence's oversight, and she asks us to prove this. Also, if we speak to Lawrence directly, we can find out that the mine has recently been taken over by goblins, forcing everyone out. So he would like us to go into the mines and basically figure out what's going on with these goblins and ideally get rid of them. And then lastly, we can talk to a third guy. This is actually probably the least important, but talking to these guys does give us the cage we need, which I'll get to in just a second. Brandon, who we will meet when talking to Lawrence, because he's talking to Lawrence when we walk up for the first time, asks us to go into the mine and fetch some tenebrium for him to basically sell for his retirement plan. And he also gives us a bloodstone cage, or some sort of chest, basically. Now this cage we get to keep even after the quest is over, and it allows us to safely transport tenebrium items, because as I mentioned just a second ago, and as the miners told us, tenebrium causes a disease called the rot. That is not just a gimmick. If your character uses tenebrium items without tenebrium resistance, you will straight up get the rot. It's a very real thing that has to be then cured. It's a whole thing. So avoid getting it. It sucks. So with that out of the way, we can go ahead and head towards the mine. So we do this by heading through the forest slightly north of Ikara's cabin down a different path. Now this will take us into several orc patrols. Now, when we kill all these guys, I believe it's possible to charm your way through them, but for the most part, you're going to kill them. So once we kill all these orcs, we can actually find orders from one Grutilda from Hunter's Edge. Now, again, if you'd been playing the game yourself, you would have heard Hunter's Edge come up a couple times here and there before this. And basically, it is a town to the east that was recently taken over by orcs. And we'll get to it later, but basically this is just some foreshadowing for later, these orc tribes that we're fighting in the forest on our way to the mines. So once we do that, we actually come up on some goblins. Now, from right at this point, there is a very long gauntlet to the entrance of the mines that is crowded with orcs. Now, the game actually recommends that you sneak by them subtly. Like when you come up to the first one, your characters will be like, oh, we could probably sneak past this guy, just kind of out loud ambiently. So that said, very viable option, but basically, you'd be skipping a ton of experience if you did that, so personally, I prefer to kill all of them, which I do. But once you get to the end of the gauntlet here, as I like to call it, and to the entrance to the mines, you find out that it's actually the Immaculates who are in charge of the mine and not the goblins, because you see the goblins speaking to an Immaculate just outside the entrance asking where their leader is and why they haven't seen him in a while. The goblins, that is, which obviously implies some level of cooperation between the two. Now, we unfortunately don't get to follow up on this conversation yet, as approaching them does start combat and we have to kill all of them. Now, once we get inside the mines, we'll be kind of notified over to a barrel hiding spot where we can meet a man named Milkus. Milkus is awesome because he gives us a ton of context as to what is happening. Milkus explains that Lawrence actually hired these goblins that are in the mine. The goblins pretended to be immune to rot, so Lawrence thought he could hire them and then they would mine the tenebrium, being immune to the rot. However, once the goblins got control of the mine, they immediately handed it over to the Immaculates, because the Immaculates are actually employing the goblins because the goblin leader, Satacondrus, who we'll learn about here in just a second, is actually looking to learn more about the Bloodstones, and the Conduit basically promised him knowledge for his help. The orcs that raided Hunter's Edge that I just mentioned a little bit ago actually gave the citizens of Hunter's Edge to the Immaculates, well, to the goblins specifically, as slaves, and then the goblins gave those citizens again to the Immaculates, and the Immaculates have turned them all into the undead. So when we see these undead enchanted miners here in the mine, that's how they got here. The Immaculates have been basically killing them and raising them as servants, because obviously the undead don't, have to worry about the rot either. Now, from here, if we destroy the cave-in to our left, we can actually head up around to the side and meet some Immaculate members. Now, it's possible to persuade them that you are friendly, and they'll basically give you a little more context, but honestly, even if you kill them, you'll get basically the same information. So basically, all these guys are protecting this bone totem. Now, this bone totem is what they are using to control all of the undead miners. So if we kill them and then break this bone totem, it will actually set them free. Because if we had gone a little farther up this mine shaft, we'll actually run into a bunch of the enchanted miners who basically ask us to go do this. So if you want to just jump the gun a little bit, you can destroy the totem, which frees the undead. You can have a short conversation with them a little later, and then they all die. But basically, they're just thankful that they're not undead slaves anymore. So to the right, we can actually find Drexus in a cage. Now, Drexus will explain part of what I just mentioned earlier, that their leader, Satacondrus, actually wants to learn about the Bloodstones. However, the Immaculates have no intention of actually helping them. They're betraying the goblins as well, because that's what the Immaculates do. So they've actually locked up their goblins of the mine's leader, Drexus, the local leader, and several of his goblins in a cage, and they plan on turning them into undead slaves as well. Real quick, the side quest for Lawrence actually wants us to deal with the goblin problem. So if we kill Drexus, we can get Drexus's head, and then before we continue on with this quest, if you want the reward for that, you need to go back to Lawrence immediately and turn it in, for reasons I'll get to later, but I just wanted to mention that right here in this part of the walkthrough, that if you want the proper reward for that side quest, you need to kill Drexus, get his head, and then immediately go back afterwards to Silverglen and turn that quest in. Because once we've resolved all of those things, we will have also learned from these conversations, which I've been holding back a little bit from, is the Immaculates have been raising something that has been referred to by a couple different names in the conversations up to this point. Hell Lords is my personal favorite. Actually, they're Death Knights. So, the Immaculates in this mine have been raising Death Knights who are on patrol in the mine shafts we're about to get to. Thing is, the Death Knights are invulnerable. You cannot damage them in any way. So you're basically forced with sneaking past them because you will not win this fight. Your teleporter pyramids also don't work, so you have to sneak through here in this mine. Like legit, there is no way to kill these Death Knights. With that in mind, the easiest thing to do here is if you have a character who has the invisibility spell from the Scoundrel Tree, is to send them up ahead by themselves, by turning them invisible and not even bothering to sneak, sending them through these mine shafts until you get to the way shrine slightly farther along the mine shafts. And then, using your other 3 party members, send them to the way shrine at the very entrance to the mine, and then click on that way shrine and have them teleport between the 2 way shrines, because you can do that, but you cannot use your teleporter pyramids or rift travel in here. But using that method, you can get basically your whole party past the main bulk of the Death Knight patrols pretty easily. Eventually, once we navigate all these Death Knight patrols, we're going to come across a locked temple door. So once we get to the door, and again, you would have known this, I didn't want to mention it right off the bat, but you need a password for this door. The password, if you were paying close attention to the conversations earlier, is actually the goblin leader's name, Satacondrus. So that's literally the password you need to choose for the door, is the word Satacondrus. Now, once we get inside the temple, we will find a Death Knight forge where they have been forging these invulnerable Death Knights from. And once we go a little farther past this forge, Leandra pops up, stops our whole party. If your entire party isn't present for this conversation, she teleports all of them in. And then Leandra explains that the reason she has been killing things in mass to power these bloodstones she's been creating is to make the Death Knights, because the Death Knights are immune to damage. They cannot be harmed. So with that in mind, her end goal for bringing about the void that we saw in our end of time bits of the game, the Void Dragon is looming, threatening to bring about the actual end of time. In order to bring about that fate, Leandra is planning on using these Death Knights in mass to basically make an unstoppable army that marches and kills all. Now, Leandra is controlling the Death Knights by basically adding little bits of her blood to the magic with which she is creating them, making the Death Knights loyal to her. So she explains all this, now that we've found the forge anyway, and she takes this opportunity to do the standard villain thing where they're like, now my Death Knight shall destroy you while I leave, and don't bother to confirm that you died. So, from here, the Death Knights in the room, she raises 4 of them. No, it's 3, sorry. And you have to run away, and you will eventually get to a Mirror of Astarte at the end of the path that you are running away from the Death Knights from. So this Mirror of Astarte will let you teleport to other areas, which you will then be safe from the Death Knights. The rest of this part of the video is basically just going to be exploration and learning some lore through environmental storytelling. From jumping around from the Mirrors of Astarte through this ruins, we can go to the crypt, the High Priest Chapel, and the entryway. So if you want to leave immediately, you can just go to the entryway because that's where the actual exit is. Now, however, if we go to the crypt, we can meet a ghost of the priests that used to actually occupy this temple when it was used as an actual temple. This priest will actually explain that this temple is a temple to Astarte, the goddess of source. Now, this is the first mention we have of Astarte being an actual goddess, and I'll get into the lore implications of that towards the end of this video. I will take some time to talk about that, but we'll scroll over it for now. In addition to this, if we go to the High Priest chambers through the Mirror of Astarte, we can actually find Leandra's little safe haven that she's been using. And we can get a lot of more background information on her relationships with some of the other characters that we meet, but most importantly, we learn from her journal here that she had actually created a spell to make the Death Knights vulnerable to damage, because just in case they ever tried to turn on her specifically because, say the blood part of the spell failed or something and they weren't loyal to her, she's been working on a spell to basically kill them, just in case. So this spell takes her actual spell and combines it with some of her blood and uses that to make Death Knights vulnerable to attack. So we'll find the spell half of this right here in this little safe haven area. Now, as this safe haven area might tell you, and all of the fire raining down around us, something I didn't mention up to this point is the reason we wanted to turn Drexus's head into Lawrence immediately after getting it is that once we get to this part, once we have that conversation with Leandra at the entrance to this temple that we were just in, the entire mine gets flooded with lava and is no longer traversable. So once we escape this area, it's done. There's no way out. Once we get the information about Astarte and the information from Leandra's little safe chamber room, we can then head to the entryway through the Mirror of Astarte and traverse the burning path down to another mirror that will actually let us leave. So once we are out of the mines, again, they are completely gone. So we can go back to town and turn in our side quests. If you waited to talk to Lawrence until this point, he will basically refuse to give you a reward because, you know, the mines are destroyed. However, you can help him get his proverbial comeuppance for basically selling out his mine to not only the Rot, but also the Goblins. You can complete Nadia's side quest to help with that as well, and then Brandon just gives you a flat reward if you give him the Tenebrium that he requested. Lastly, we can go speak to Ikara after we have now found out what Leandra was doing in the Luculla mines. Ikara will be like, oh my god, she's raising Death Knights. They haven't been seen since Baracus Rex's reign, and, you know, when the Source Hunters destroyed all of them the last time. Death Knights before this were actually weak to some things. They were still very strong warriors, but they weren't like literally immune to damage. Apparently being empowered through the Bloodstones is what specifically has made them invulnerable. So just something to keep in mind. That's why they're so strong in this particular game. And lastly, Ikara, now that we have this information and we were basically able to figure out what was going on in the Luculla mines, mentions that basically we need more information about what they're planning to do next. And she sends you to infiltrate the Immaculates, because the part of Silverglen that I did not mention is that the Silverglen town is actually a hub of Immaculate activity, because the Conduit came there, cured several miners of the Rot. So basically they see this woman and this religion as like this huge savior organization that's doing amazing things for them. But of course, as we know, they're actually lunatics who are murdering people en masse. But the villagers don't know that. They just know that these people are working literal miracles, basically, to heal miners sick with the Rot. So we can use this to our advantage, as Ikara mentions, and infiltrate them, which we will get into in our next episode. So next episode, we'll be following that Infiltrate the Immaculates questline and seeing where that leads us. So that is going to wrap the story part of this up. I did, like I mentioned, want to talk a little bit about Astarte. So she's mentioned as the goddess of source. So two things with that. If you've played Original Sin 2, you know that technically there's only 7 gods of Rivellon, or 7 known gods as far as the ones that came from the race of Eternals. Now, Astarte is seen at the very least working with the 7. They actually mentioned in one of the cinematics from earlier that the gods, when they made the god box, specifically chose to put it in the first garden with Astarte. The thing is, and the reason I bring this up, is that when we speak to the Weaver of Time earlier, she actually mentions that when she saw Astarte, she didn't think Astarte was a full-blown goddess. So it seems, in my speculative opinion on this particular thing, that Astarte is less of a full-blown goddess and more of a representation of a facet of the cosmic powers, so to speak. She's basically like the representation of Source physically. She's like an avatar of it. That's how I personally like to think of it, especially seeing as the Weaver literally says that she doesn't think Astarte is a full-blown goddess the way the actual 7 gods are. So just something to keep in mind. Whether or not she is or isn't shouldn't really make a difference to this story, or frankly the overall lore of Divinity. Because as we know, the 7 gods are actually phonies anyway, and it's very possible that Astarte is more of an actual force of creation of sorts, rather than a god in the traditional sense of how the 7 gods came to power. So she might be more of a representation of an actual facet of the universe, so to speak. That speculation aside, that's going to wrap up the video, guys. I certainly hope you enjoyed it. I hope you stick around for the next episode. If you did, be so kind as to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But thank you so much for watching, and have a fantastic day. What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you episode 6 of our full story of Divinity Original Sin. So, last episode we explored the Luculla mines and discovered what Leandra was doing with all of these bloodstones she's been creating and collecting, which is nothing else besides forging invulnerable Death Knights. However, we also discovered they had a weakness, and Ikara, after learning of all of this, requested that we find out exactly what it is the Immaculates are doing in the Luculla forest. In order to do that, we need to head to the town of Silverglen. Last episode, I mentioned briefly that it was under the control of the Immaculates, because Leandra had come to the mining town, which was plagued by a disease called the Rot, and used the bloodstones to heal several people to spread her Immaculate religion. And because the bloodstones cured what they considered an incurable disease that was basically guaranteed death, they were like, holy cow, what's this all about? And jumped on board. Most people blissfully unaware that the Immaculates are basically a sort of death cult. In order to start exploring what it is they're actually doing, we can head to the Immaculate Chapel in Silverglen and talk to the High Abbot there. I think is his actual title, but he's like a priest. His name is Loic. Now through Loic, we can have a conversation about how to join the Immaculates, and he gives us a book called the Book of the Immaculates, I think actually. Part 1, I think there's a total of 6 parts total, but we need to read parts 1 through 3 and answer Loic's questions to complete this part of the test. So basically, the books of the Immaculate basically explain that the Lesser Bloods, or otherwise known as the Lost Ones, you'll sometimes see the game call them, are basically the right of the people who are above them to kill them and slaughter them for their blood. So in the more trivial sense, in the way that this actually spreads through normal people, is that most people seem to think this involves like animals and stuff, the way people, will eat animals, that kind of thing, and then, just also use their blood to create bloodstones. That's the kind of gist they seem to have been going for, at least on the surface level. That seems to be how they attract people. And basically, this book explains that the blood of lesser beings is ceded to the higher beings, that kind of stuff. So it sounds about as crazy as it actually is. Just remember, these people are like low-key killing people, so there you go. Now that said, we need to talk to Loic again after reading a couple of these. He will ask us a series of questions which require us to answer truthfully, which if you read the books, it should be super easy. There's not a lot going on there. It basically just asks about what I just mentioned. Is the lesser blood used in service of the greater blood? That kind of stuff. So it's pretty basic as long as you read the books. Then after doing so, Loic will give you his blessing, which allows us to travel up the western path of Silverglen up to the windswept plateau area of Lucala Forest, and it's not really a forest at this point even. There is a small checkpoint of sorts along this road that is held by Immaculates, and basically what it serves as is if you talk to the guard right here, he'll actually tell you if you're high enough level to venture on, because as I mentioned 1 or 2 episodes ago, the level curve in Lucala Forest is very important. You'll get here at like level 8 or 9, and if you go straight to this, you're going to be fighting like level 14 enemies like immediately, so obviously that's a bit of a problem. So they set up this little checkpoint, and it basically serves as a you are or are not high enough level to do this right now kind of thing. So basically, as long as you've been following the stories as I've been laying them out, you'd be fine if you had gotten up to this point. This is where the Lucala Forest actually kind of separates, because we only need to go so far up this path and then see the big giant skull cave thing that Loic told us about, and that's pretty much where we need to go. However, this leaves about half of the Lucala Forest map to basically explore and just do like side quests and stuff, so I just figured I'd mention that like we're only going to explore like maybe half of this forest for the sake of the story, so just there you go. Upon entering the skull-shaped cave that I just mentioned and moving forward a little bit, we are confronted by a statue who explains that basically we're going to face a series of trials if we want to become part of the Immaculate religion. The first thing we do is head forward down an open corridor, and at the end of which all of our characters that are in the room when this happens are infected with none other than the disease called the rot. Now, we don't really need to worry about it right now. It doesn't actually do anything in this particular context that is of much concern. But after this, we can head forward to our first real trial. So the first of these trials, and we're basically confronted by a statue who sort of gives the gist of what we're supposed to do in every trial room. So for the first of these trials, really all we have to do is put the appropriate amount of weight on the couple switches that are laying around on the ground. And when you put weights on them, it will tell you a percentage of either too much or too little, and basically you're looking for a 100% sign when you do it. I think the actual weights are 1, 5, 7, and 9 kilograms total. So you can either bring something with that exact weight or play around with some of the vases and stuff and try to get it to work. But either way, you're going to have to balance these weights out in order to get some force fields down, and that's how you do that particular trial. And the next trial is actually even easier than that. You just have to play around with some levers until you get the right combination and hit the one in the middle of the room. And if you did it right, the door will unlock. If you did it wrong, you're attacked by a singular mob that'll happen, and then the next room is actually less of a trial and more of a conversation. So there will be a starstone in the middle of the next room. We can walk up to it and, using our ability to absorb starstones, do exactly that, and then we can explore the room a little more and then find Loic. Now alternatively, you can skip around the starstone and then go speak to Loic as well. But ultimately the result will be the same, because Loic presents the Starstone and tries to get you to kill a chicken to power up the Starstone into a Bloodstone and then heal you of the rot. However, if you already approach the Starstone, your, again, ability to absorb the powers from Starstones will have done that beforehand, and he will notice that and then rush off. Alternatively, he presents the Starstone and then the same thing happens, so regardless, this is going to happen. So Loic, upon realizing that you've absorbed this power from the Starstone, runs off and then comes back with several Immaculate enemies that we then have to fight and kill for our very survival. So once this is done and we kill Loic and get his key to the church, which is what we need to move forward, and your character should say something about it when you pick it up. We need this particular key to go back to the Immaculate Church in Silverglen and use the hatch in the corner of the room that you probably noticed before. Now this takes us down to Loic's personal chambers, where we find a portal and 2 bloodstones. So pick up the 2 bloodstones. You're just going to use those to unlock rooms in your homestead, because, you know, we unlock a room every time we use them, as up to this point we have done many times. And more than likely, this will also trigger a piece of the Source Hunter's history to also fall into place, which if you've been following the series, you'll know what I'm talking about. And we will get to those towards the end of the video. For now, we're just going to carry on uninterrupted. So, if we use the portal that we find in Loic's chambers, we get taken to an area of Luculla Forest known as Sacred Stone. And in order to, from here, find out what the Immaculates have been doing, we need to basically hunt out their leader in probably what they would consider the most sacred place around. So we can explore the actual town of Sacred Stone a little bit. If you have Bear Daughter with you, which is one of the companions, this is where her companion story will reach its conclusion, by the way. We don't, and I'm not really covering those in this particular walkthrough, so we're going to carry on. Now, the village of Sacred Stone has a few things you can do, but honestly, it's not really what we're focused on. What we need to do is go to the west of Sacred Stone to a path that is blocked by noxious bulb traps, and we need to navigate this path all the way down to the end of it, where we will run into some orcs holding a bunch of people prisoner. They will attack us immediately, and then we kill them. And then after that is done, we can talk to the guards at the door slightly to the north. These guys, if you have an enlightened amulet with you, which you should have gotten one from killing Loic or a couple other people, honestly, up to this point. However, if you have the enlightened amulet on you and you didn't, like, say, sell it or something, you can just pass right by these guys, like, completely unbothered. Otherwise, they'll fight you. So once we get inside the temple, we need to light the 4 braziers that are around, which will unlock a path into the actual proper church. From here, once we get to the altar, we are confronted by a man named Mangoth, who seems to be the leader of the Immaculates right under Leandra herself. Mangoth explains basically his feelings, but doesn't actually reveal anything we don't really already know up to this point. So he summons a bunch of demons. We have to fight all of the demons, well, the 2 demons he summons, and also some followers of his. And then he disappears. Now, we actually need to find him, and if you go up to the second story, you can speak to a ghostly woman called the Librarian, who basically seems annoyed with the Immaculate's presence, but it's not like she can do much about it. She explains that Mangoth probably went under the altar somewhere, because she sees them going in and out of there. And if you look around the room behind some of the pillars, you can find a lever that will actually move the giant stone altar in the middle of the room. Now, once you go down here, there will be another slight puzzle to solve. In one of the books in the room, it will actually tell you the order of the switches you need to press that are around this. There's 4 switches in the room, basically, and one of the books will tell you the order that you need to press them in, which is like basically just counterclockwise, really. So once you press all 4 switches, the room in the center of the room pops open. And once you go to enter it, Mangoth will then show up again, and this time he will attack you directly instead of running away, and you are forced to kill him. Now, once that is done, you will be able to read the diary in the room that just opened up, which is Leandra's diary, in which she explains that basically the Immaculates are supposed to disband if she dies, because in her goal to bring about the Void, she believes that she's the only one that can do it, and basically without her, if she dies for any reason, she wants the Immaculates to disband. makes that very clear. However, we are not done just yet. If we use the hatch behind the altar or the podium where we just picked up the diary, we can go down into what seems to be a second hiding place for Leandra in the Lucala Forest. So once we move about this area, we can read a couple of her books which explain her side of things and how basically that she is, trying to do what she's told us she's doing up to this point, which is to bring the void. It just gives us a little more context into that and what she's planning on doing. When basically what she's planning on doing is ambushing Astarte, the goddess of source, as we learned from the last episode, with not just the void dragon, but also other forces that will make it basically impossible for Astarte to win. Because what we didn't know up to this point is that the reason Astarte has been kind of flitting in and out of our view is because she has actually been fighting the void dragon since it was unleashed from the god box, which we also learned last episode of the episode before, I don't remember exactly which, but we learned that the void dragon was released from the god box it was imprisoned in, and Astarte actually fought it. So we can learn all of that, and lastly we can pick up a vial of Leandra's blood. Now if we go back and talk to Akara, because we basically also find one last thing in this room I just forgot to mention, is that she is headed for the Source Temple in the Phantom Forest, which is a slightly deeper part of the forest, and she is trying to find Zandalore because Zandalore is a keeper of the Source. Basically, Zandalore is part of an order that takes the Source very seriously, as you might imagine. And for whatever reason, Leandra needs Zandalore present for something at the Source Temple so she can bring the Void Dragon closer finally, and then finish her plans. So we know what Leandra is doing next, which is heading for the Source Temple in the Phantom Forest. So we can bring all of this information back to Akara, who obviously requests us to go to the Phantom Forest and put a stop to this, which brings an end to the Lucala Forest portion of our walkthrough, which brings us to the last third, basically, of the game, which will be a little shorter, probably 2 or 3 parts. But before we get ahead of ourselves, we also found that vial of Leandra's blood that I mentioned just a little bit ago. So we can combine this with the Leandra's spell that we found in the mines from the previous episode, and if we craft these two things together, we can make a Death Knight vulnerability spell, which removes their invulnerable status. And once we make this book, we can actually use it to teach all of our characters this skill. It is not consumed on use. From this, we will have gained a way to harm the previously invulnerable Death Knights, which will assuredly have probably caused a death or two on your part. And with that, we have our next goal for our next episode, which is entering the Phantom Forest and seeing what we can do to find Zandalore in the Source Temple. And Akara gives us the perfect place to start because it turns out that Zandalore has a house in a town nearby the Phantom Forest known as Hunter's Edge, and she suggests that we go to Zandalore's house first to discover where he might be or how to get a hold of him, basically. So that brings us to the last part of this particular video, which is showing you guys the cinematics that we'll have unlocked from all the bloodstones we collected throughout the Lucala Forest. This first cinematic, which you'll be watching right about now.
For millennia, the God Box was flanked by the 2 devoted guardians. But Astarte's playmate, a creature called the Trife, turned her attention to the forbidden box. I may know a way to destroy what's inside, hissed the scheming creature. Together, we can set the Guardians free. Open its lid, Astarte, and we can have a look together. Astarte trusted her friend and assented. She pitied the Guardians and welcomed a chance to free them. Let me help you, she whispered into the ear of one. I know your duty, but you both deserve a chance at freedom. Haven't you suffered enough of this chore? She asked the other. Look, your companion is free already. The Guardians, unaccustomed to such attention, started. She had planted a seed of curiosity within them, rekindled a desire that had, for eons, lain dormant. Slowly, they glanced at one another, and the Trife's trap was sprung.
shows how the demon known as, well, the Voidwoken rather, known as the Trife, tricked Astarte in the first garden after the God Box was placed there into persuading the Guardians, the two Source Hunters we're playing now, into leaving so she could potentially see what was in the God Box. So that is the first cinematic, and we will likely have gotten enough Bloodstones and Starstones gathered up to immediately unlock a second cinematic, which actually explains what happens after that.
With the Guardians distracted, Astarte lifted the lid of the God Box. What she saw was nothingness. Astarte had called forth the Void Dragon, whose sole purpose was to undo all creation. Caught off guard and terrified, the Guardians, sworn protectors, fled. But Astarte stood firm. She grabbed hold of the dragon and hurled it and herself into the reaches of the void. Here she battled the dragon for all eternity. For his deception, the Trife was cast out of the first creation. He fell to Rivellon, a monstrous creature unworthy of the realm of the gods. Since that terrible day, Source has been tainted by the presence of the Void. A once beautiful power has become corrupted, and those attempting to wield it often go mad in the process.
And of course, this second cinematic showing that Astarte has been battling the Void Dragon for quite some time, basically forever, almost, since the Trife convinced the Source Hunters to abandon their duty, well, tricked Astarte into convincing them to abandon their duty. And Astarte opens the God Box, the Void Dragon is then unleashed, and being caught unaware, the Guardians, the two Source Hunters were playing in a previous life, so to speak, just vanished. They dipped out. Astarte has been battling the Void Dragon, keeping it at bay ever since, but lately has been unable to continue to do so for the reasons of Liandra killing all these people and everything and powering up all these Bloodstones and using them to call the Void Dragon closer. There is all of that information for you guys. That is going to do it for part 6 of Divinity Original Sin, the story of. So, our next episode, again, we will be entering the Phantom Forest and beginning our search for Zandalore so we can see the Source Temple and basically try to see what Liandra specifically is trying to do there. Now, with that in mind, guys, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you guys. If you'd like, comment, subscribe, do all that YouTube stuff, I'd certainly appreciate it. It definitely helps the channel grow. But even if you don't, you guys are a legend. Thank you for watching. Have an amazing day. What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you episode 7 of our full story of Divinity Original Sin. So, last episode, we wrapped up things in the Luculla Forest by finding out exactly what the Immaculates had been up to in the town of Sacred Stone. So, with that in mind, we are ready to follow the advice of Ikara and the information that we found while tracking the Immaculate's activities in tracking down Liandra in the Phantom Forest because she is going after a Source Temple that is located there. So, upon entering the Phantom Forest, Zigzax actually interrupts and speaks to us about how the homestead is actually under attack by void demons, and that how he knows the source of this attack is actually originating in the Luculla Forest in the northernmost corner of the area. Now, he informs us that demons have basically been summoned here using blood magic, otherwise known as bloodstones, of course. So he directs us to the Void Temple to, of course, deal with this problem and save our homestead at the end of time. He also explains that there are 3 paths that we can take to reach the Bloodstone in this temple. The one on the left, which is teeming with Immaculates, which would probably be the easiest one. The middle path, which has less enemies, but they are giant demons who are only vulnerable to Tenebrium. And then the right path, which is full of environmental risks, like lava, which basically means instant death. So, with that in mind, we rush off to the Void Temple to solve this problem as it pops up. So, this is pretty easy. I prefer to take the left path and kill everything. All you have to actually do is reach the Bloodstone at the end of the path. And once you destroy it, all of the demons and enemies then disappear, and Zigzax informs us upon returning to the homestead that they've finally pieced together the last of the Source Hunters' history as the Guardians of the God Box. So, here is that cinematic for you.
The Guardians had failed. Source was tainted, the Void was loosed, and all that stood between Rivellon and annihilation was Astarte herself. Overcome by guilt, they hoped to undo their failure by undoing reality itself. And so, they ripped their threads from the tapestry of time, so becoming unknown to history and unknowing of themselves for all eternity. As their threads fell to Rivellon like shooting stars, they hardened into crystals the people called Starstones.
So from this, we learn that after the Guardians fled from their duty of protecting the God Box once the Void Dragon was unleashed, in their shame, they ripped their very existence from the tapestry of time, which is why there were holes in it. And those threads of fate fell to the earth and became the Starstones. So in fleeing from the Void Dragon, they not only abandoned their duty, but also inadvertently caused the Bloodstones, which are of course being used to draw the Void Dragon closer to the end of time. Basically all of this is their fault. Moving on, heading back to the Phantom Forest, we'll come upon a log that is glowing green. Now you'll learn quickly from stepping in this that if you try to go through it, you will die. So, at first it'll poison you in the log, and then once you get past the log, you die instantly. This is of course reminiscent of Death Fog, much like the first game, Divinity, had a reference to Death Fog as well, but at this point it still isn't called that. That is an invention of Divinity Original Sin 2, though the concepts were very much so in game beforehand, which is why I mentioned it. Now we'll have to get back to this because obviously there's no way to pass it right now, and we're going to head south to Hunter's Edge. So upon arriving at the entrance to Hunter's Edge, we can speak to a undead merchant as well as Arhu, who basically explains the state of the goings-on in Hunter's Edge. Basically, Hunter's Edge was taken over by orcs a while back, which at this point in the game we would likely have heard from either our companion Medora, whose companion quest, by the way, resolves in Hunter's Edge, or we would have seen the foreshadowing in the Luculla Forest, which specifically mentions the Allmother, Grutilda, having taken over Hunter's Edge and has been selling the citizens of which as slaves to the goblins in the Luculla mines, as we mentioned in, I believe it was episode 5? Our goal in Hunter's Edge is to, of course, track down Zandalore, who we know was at some point living in Hunter's Edge, so we need to get into his house. Now, in order to do that, we have to pass through the Immaculate and orc-infested town of Hunter's Edge. We can enter the town and pose as an Immaculate envoy ourselves. At this point, you can head straight to Zandalore's house, but upon arriving, you're going to find out that the entrance is blocked by a magical, unpassable barrier. And that basically, we're going to have to find another way into the house to learn more about what Zandalore is doing and where he went. So, if we do some digging around town, we can learn that the orcs and the mountain folk, or the Immaculate tribe here, are at odds. They do not like each other at all. And we can of course use this to our advantage by basically sabotaging them left and right through side quests, which will make the ultimate goal of having them destroy each other much easier. So, as we do this, we will also learn that the Immaculates and Orcs are searching for a group of 3 villagers that they aren't able to find. Now, in investigating this, we can learn that there are still prisoners from the town being locked up in a dungeon, which we can choose to investigate. However, there is an alternative to finding these villagers, but we'll get to that in just a second. As I've mentioned up to this point, we can push the orcs and the mountain folk tribe into fighting each other, which is obviously advantageous to us because their presence here is a problem, and all of them are terrible people, really. If we speak to the mountain folk leader Yaharl, we can find out that the bloodstones he was tasked with guarding were stolen in the night, and he's pretty sure that his best soldier and right-hand man, Garrick, was killed in the fight because no one can find him. The orcs, of course, have accused Garrick himself of being the one who actually stole these things from the tribe, and is thus blaming the mountain folk for it. So Yaharl will task you with helping him find the actual culprit. And we can track this lead down, which is pretty straightforward. All you gotta do is walk into the next room where the bloodstones were hidden, and then follow the blood trail outside of town slightly to the north, which brings you to a temple where obviously someone was killed. We can then explore said temple, find out that it is Garrick's body that was dumped into the temple through a grate, which is what we had found earlier. And not only that, he also has the broken horn of one Hornless Gorag on him, which is one of the orcs in town who is missing a horn. And we can find that horn, thus proving that the orcs factually stole the bloodstones, and basically giving the mountain folk the ammunition they need to start full-blown attacking the orcs in the town. I tell you that, but this is actually mostly just a side quest, but it's heavily involved in the area of Hunter's Edge, so I just wanted to go ahead and get it out of the way. And then, of course, at this point, we can report back to Yaharl, who openly attacks the orcs, and then you can basically clear out the town of all of the enemies that way. And while that's fun, it doesn't really solve our problem of needing to get into Zandalor's house, which requires us to find the villagers, because they had actually worked for Zandalor prior to the invasion of the orcs. Now, the most fun way, in my opinion, to find these villagers, naturally, is actually through the use of the Pet Pal perk. In exploring the town, we can find out that the orcs have employed an orc known as the Rat Catcher to find these villagers. The Rat Catcher is doing so by basically using hordes of rats to sniff them out. Now, if we use the Pet Pal perk, we can talk to the cat in the middle of town called Janixa. Janixa will tell us that she actually is the cat of the family that is in hiding from the orcs and the mountain folk. And as such, Janixa will ask us to kill the rats for the rat catchers. So what we can do then is do exactly that, kill some of the rats we find around town. Once we kill a rat in town, all of them will scurry back to their nests, and we're forced to find a more creative way to deal with them. So all around town there are these rat holes everywhere. So what you can do is get a block of cheese and a vial of poison from the tavern in town, combine the two to make poison cheese, and set that outside of one of the rat holes in town, and the rats will eat it, they'll die of poison, and then you will actually be confronted by the Rat King. The Rat King will then, ask you to kill Janixa the cat, which you can do. Or you can, of course, kill the Rat King for Janixa, who will then tell you where her family is hiding. Or, alternatively, you can help the Rat King by killing the cat, thus helping the Rat King succeed in his mission of finding the family. However, this will result in their death, just so you know. If you do this, you are very much so helping the evil people kill captives that they had been searching for. Whereas if you kill the Rat King, you can choose to, be the good guy, and thus save the family from the orcs and mountain folk that they're hiding from. So just some stuff to keep in mind. Now, either way, both of these options, you will find out that the entrance to the hiding place is actually hidden under a giant boulder behind the house of the family that is hiding. And that the key to the hatch under that rock is actually in a beehive behind Zandalor's house. So we can go get that key, go destroy the boulder that is hiding these people, enter their hideout, and then speak with that family themselves. Now, they actually have a lot of good information for us. We can explain that we are here on Ikara's behalf searching for Zandalor, and we can prove this by giving them a ring that Ikara gave us to prove to them that this is the case. Basically just to prove that we're with Ikara and Zandalor. And once they receive this ring, this family will actually give you a bunch of information that Zandalor told them before he ran off to the Source Temple. And that basically he was headed to the Source Temple, and that in order to enter the Source Temple, we need a rune from an entity known as the Spirit of the Forest, because that's the only way you can actually enter into the Source Temple. And then from here, this family explains that there's a teleporter in the room with them that you can use to enter Zandalor's house. Now, once you do this, you're immediately going to set off a bunch of traps. You have to head upstairs, hop through some more little hoops, and then you can hit a lever which disarms the traps. And here you will find an amulet that will protect you from the death fog-like substance in the log that I mentioned towards the start of the video. This is paramount that we pick this up. We will need it. We have to have it to get through there without dying or other alternative means that are a pain. So, we want to pick up this amulet. And then at that point, we can of course head back to the family downstairs past the portal back into the little cave hiding spot they're in. And then once we speak to them and we tell them that the path out is clear, if we haven't gotten rid of the orcs and the mountain folk yet, they will go to the way shrine in Zandalor's house and escape that way. And they'll give us a reward as compensation, so there's another side quest for you. So guys, that is pretty much everything there is to do in Hunter's Edge. We can set the orcs and mountain folk against each other, killing them, which, helps us in the long run, really, because the orcs are awful, awful monsters. We can resolve Medora, our companion's quest here. We can also, of course, get into Zandalor's house and learn where he went, which is the Source Temple, and another piece of vital information that we need a rune from the Spirit of the Forest to enter said forest. And then lastly, we can, of course, get the amulet that we need to enter the Phantom Forest proper. Now from here, we can head back to that log, and Arhu will actually explain that he isn't actually human at all. He started his life as a cat. A cat who just so happened to befriend Cassandra, the twin sister of Baracus Rex, which we found out about in episode, I believe it was, 3. Now, Arhu is telling us this information before we enter the Phantom Forest proper, because he knows that Cassandra, who was turned into a lich, is actually the Phantom of the Phantom Forest. She's the reason it is called the Phantom Forest, and the forest is her domain, and we're gonna have to deal with her to pass through it. So guys, that is where we are going to leave this particular episode, episode 7. Next episode, we will probably be exploring what is going on with Cassandra in the Phantom Forest, because we're going to have to deal with her to get to the Source Temple at the heart of it. So, I really hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, please let me know in the comment section below. Like, comment, subscribe, do all that YouTube-y stuff. But honestly, just thank you guys so much for watching, and have an amazing day. What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you our final episode of the full story of Divinity Original Sin. So last episode we explored Hunter's Edge and basically handled all of our affairs there between the orcs and the Immaculates, as well as explored Zandalor's house and figured out that he actually left that house and his servants to go explore the Source Temple in pursuit of Leandra himself. So our next step is to, of course, now that we have the means to enter the Phantom Forest, which prior to this would have been deadly, we can now explore, search for the Source Temple, and find Zandalor. In order to do that, we need a rune from a being known as the Spirit of the Forest, and this rune is required to open the door of the Source Temple. Without it, the door will not open. It basically serves as a key. Upon arriving in the Phantom Forest, we can, of course, begin our search. Now we know, in addition to the Spirit of the Forest, we know because of Arhu telling us that the Phantom Forest gets its name from a woman named Cassandra, who is actually a lich. She is the proverbial phantom of the Phantom Forest. So, here's a bit of a qualifier for you guys. The first town of Syceal and the Phantom Forest, I think, are some of the best, most well-done parts of the game. The Phantom Forest, as well as the town of Syceal, all have a lot of interactions, and you can interact with a lot of them in a lot of different ways. So there's a ton of ways the events of the Phantom Forest can play out. So with that in mind, I can't guarantee that I'm going to mention every single one of them. I'm just going to try to explain them in the most narratively comprehensible way. So if I miss a specific interaction, sorry, I'm just trying to give people the gist of the narrative here. It's very possible I won't cover literally every option. I am going to try to mention as many of them as possible, though. So, upon arriving in the Phantom Forest, you're likely to run into two things. One, a human being decaying but also grown into a tree. There's a couple of these actually scattered throughout the Phantom Forest, and they will stop you when you walk by them. And they'll basically explain that Cassandra, the Lich and Phantom of the Forest, is invulnerable. She cannot be hurt by normal means. And these people, for lack of a better word, also explained that in order to hurt Cassandra, you're going to have to burn her corpse, her original corpse, her actual bones. And they kind of point to where those probably are, which is a tomb of sorts not too far from here. I think they call it like the Hall of the Dead or something like that. The other thing you're likely to run into in the first part of the Phantom Forest is an earth elemental being harassed by some enemies. Now, once you save this earth elemental and speak to it, it will explain that it is actually the apprentice of the spirit of the forest, whose actual name is Shiara, which is basically another earth elemental. And Shiara, or Shiara's apprentice rather, will explain that Shiara has been captured by a demon named Balbareth in the right side of the Phantom Forest, and basically asks you to find a way to save the earth elemental. Now, Balbareth, if you are playing with Jhon as a companion, should sound familiar because Balbareth is the antagonist of Jhon's companion story. First, we're going to deal with Cassandra. So, Cassandra, if you talk to her before going to the tomb to destroy her corpse, you will discover that she has captured Arhu and is keeping him prisoner. Now, you can talk to Cassandra and she'll basically be like, she's invulnerable here, but she needs your help in recovering a stasis fern to basically force Arhu to stay a man forever. Because again, as we learned last episode, Arhu can change into a cat because he was born a cat. It was actually Cassandra who granted Arhu a human consciousness and basically allowed him to shift. Cassandra did this through her use of the Source. She basically turned a cat into a human being, pseudo. So, because of this, Cassandra wants to keep Arhu as a man forever because she loves him. They were like a couple before she was turned into a lich. Now, in order to do that, Cassandra needs a stasis fern, which is, ironically enough, an incredibly rare plant that is held by none other than the spirit of the forest. Now, I just want to mention that you can totally do this. You can find the spirit of the forest, go get that stasis fern, bring it back to Cassandra, and totally let things play out that way. Absolutely. However, as I think most people will agree, Cassandra is an awful human being, and you would rather save Arhu from a fate he does not want, and, basically kill her. So in order to do that, we need to find the tomb that I referenced earlier. Now, we can learn from talking to those people that are decaying that I mentioned earlier. Also, when it comes to that tomb, that the only things that can enter that tomb are the dead, so we have to get a little creative. Now, in walking up to that tomb, there are actually sentinels, which are basically just giant stone statues, and if they see you, they will actually trigger a lava trap that will, of course, kill anybody that hits the lava. So we have to get, again, a little creative with how we get into this tomb. The easiest way to do it is actually just use either an invisibility potion or someone with an invisibility skill to turn themselves invisible, walk past the sentinels because this bypasses them seeing you, and then when you get to the elevator that actually leads down to the tomb, instead of trying to use it yourself because you're alive and thus can't go into the tomb, click on the corpses that are already on top of the lift, put a teleporter pyramid in their inventory, and then send the lift down with the teleporter on that corpse's inventory, and then use the other teleporter pyramid to then teleport your party down below into the tomb, which is pretty cool. So, and then, don't forget to retrieve the teleporter pyramid that you put on the corpse's inventory. So there you go. That's pretty much the easiest way to get in there. And once you're inside this tomb, we're basically going to search for Cassandra's corpse, which just requires a little rooting around. The main thing you have to watch out for here in this tomb is there's a lot of traps. Like it's a trapped area. There's a lot of environmental traps like stunning. I think there's a little bit of lava even if you get a little too careless. So just kind of be careful where you step, but if you explore long enough, you're eventually going to find Cassandra's corpse. You need to attack it to destroy it, and this will actually render Cassandra vulnerable to damage, because prior to this, she's invulnerable. You cannot do damage to her, much like you can't attack Death Knights without making them vulnerable first. The only other thing of note in this tomb is a crazed alchemist who is actually working for Cassandra. He doesn't fight you, he actually serves as a vendor if you so choose. However, I mention this guy purely because there's an item in his lab that relates to the companion quest for Woldgraf, which is a mute scoundrel guy you can pick up. Part of his companion quest will lead you down here. You need an item from the alchemist lab for that. Then, of course, we can go back to Cassandra now that she's been made invulnerable. Once this happens and we talk to her, she immediately initiates combat. She turns into her true lich form, and you need to kill her. After this, Arhu basically says that he's upset it came to this, but, he kind of gets it, and he slinks off to do Arhu stuff. That's pretty much how you take care of the Phantom of the Forest. Which brings us to, again, the right half of the forest, where the demon Balbareth reigns supreme. So if we explore that side of the forest, we can find a bunch of roaming demons that if they see you, they will shoot towards you and blow up and likely kill your entire party. So either send one person at a time through this part of the forest to explore and kill these demons that explode or kamikaze your party. Basically, you don't want to stand too close together is what I'm getting at. So either send one person or sneak through, do whatever you got to do, and eventually you will find a shack that is guarded by cyclopean horrors of various sorts. So once we kill all of them and step into the abandoned shack, Jhon will explain that, by the way, just a real quick aside, I know I pronounce his name differently all the time. I'm doing my best. I don't know how to pronounce this guy's name. I'm terrible at remembering stuff like that, so there you go. Either way, he will explain that he knows for certain Balbareth is nearby because, again, it is Jhon's goal to meet Balbareth. Once we go down into the basement of this shack, we can find out that Balbareth is actually holding the spirit of the forest hostage. If you have Jhon, you basically have to kill Balbareth. You don't literally have to. Jhon doesn't initiate combat, but it does make the other part of this quest a little awkward. Because if Cassandra is still alive and you've gotten to this point, you can basically strike a deal with Balbareth to go kill another demon that is not too far away, who's also equally difficult to kill. And if you do that, Balbareth will just let the spirit of the forest go, which will, then allow you to get the stasis fern and go back to Cassandra, as well as the rune for the Source Temple door. Interestingly enough, and again, one of the reasons I like this, there's a lot of options here. You can totally just pickpocket the rune off of Balbareth because he's the one who actually is holding it. So that's something you can do. You can actually just kill Balbareth outright, which is easier. All sorts of stuff like that. There's plenty of options is what I'm getting at. Personally, I prefer to just kill him because why not? So once he is dead, or whichever method you chose to use, we can free Shiara, who will then give us the rune to the Source Temple door and basically thank us for, protecting her from Balbareth. Jhon's companion quest will complete upon his death as well. You can talk to him about that. Fun fact, having killed Balbareth basically renders Jhon immortal, if you're ever wondering why he's so damn old in Divinity Original Sin 2. In his specific case, this is why. We will get to that in another video after this series has concluded, however. But for now, we have everything we need to carry on with the main story and infiltrate the Source Temple. Now, you might be thinking, oh, sweet, we've got this rune. I can just walk up to the door of the Source Temple and enter. Well, you'd be fantastically wrong and clearly never played a Divinity game before. In order to get to the main door of the Source Temple, you have to first solve the environmental puzzles around the Source Temple proper in its little grounds. So basically, there are 4 switches hidden around various traps and puzzles all around the Source Temple, and what you need to do is click all 4 of those switches, which will turn all of the runes in front of the door to the Source Temple green, which will then allow using the lever to open the Source Temple grounds door work. Not the actual Source Temple itself, but the door that blocks the main entrance door, I should say. Like a weird foyer almost. But with that in mind, we can navigate these puzzles. This isn't a guide for those puzzles. Those guides actually exist. Just search them if you're curious. I don't think you're watching this part of the video for me to tell you how to solve these puzzles. We're just going to skip over that part using the magic of YouTube. Once we get to that part, we can, again, just open up the door to this weird outside lobby of sorts where we can find none other than this really big demon. I forget his exact name or how to pronounce it, but this is the demon Balbareth actually wishes you to kill should you have chosen to make a deal with Balbareth. You need to kill this guy one way or the other. He is in your way. He's pretty unavoidable. And honestly, it's pretty easy to kill him. He's not super difficult as far as boss fights go. He uses a lot of fire damage, so keep that in mind. Once he's dead, there is nothing stopping you from entering the Source Temple. So upon entering, there are a couple things we can do. So when we freed Shiara from Balbareth, if we chose to kill Balbareth to do that, Shiara will explain that there is a secret path in the Source Temple that will allow you to skip what is called the Trial of Ascension, which is, a trial, obviously. If you have that information from Shiara and a character with a high enough perception, you can find a false wall that will give you access to a mirror of Astarte that will allow you to skip pretty much the entire thing. Having a character with high enough perception is kind of a pain, and it's easier to honestly just go through the actual trial, because even if you don't have the perception, there's actually a way to cheese the trial that makes it literally faster than getting a character with high enough perception. So basically, in addition to that alternate path, we can also find a Mirror of Astarte that's already broken that Leandra used to teleport to the end of the trial herself. With that in mind, we can find a button on a rock which will explore a false path that will then lead to the actual trial. We can talk to this big intimidating door on the wall who basically tell us whether or not we are prepared for the trial. I believe this is just a straight up level check. Like this door is checking what level you are and basically saying whether or not you can pass based on that. However, like most things, this is very cheesable. If you get right up on the door, you can actually throw a teleporter pyramid past it and then teleport your entire party past this door regardless of your level, which is part of the speedrunning process for this game in case you were curious. And then that will give us access to the Trials of Ascension. So what you are actually supposed to do here is navigate this little maze-like puzzle of sorts. And at the end of those puzzles, you'll find keys to other doors of the trial, or at the end of a path, you will find information about how to light the candles and do the ritual in the main room that will allow you to continue forward. So here's the thing. If you already know which candles to light in which order, you can just cheese this and walk right by it. Or if you just look up the patterns, you can just walk right by it. That combined with the teleporter trick on the front door makes this pretty much the fastest way to get through here. For the sake of this video, we're going to skip through the trial because I just explained it to you, and that's basically what I'm doing for most of this anyway. So now that we have passed that, we get teleported to a molten fiery path, and at the end of it, we find none other than Zandalore and a broken portal to the first garden. So this is where Zandalore explains that Leandra was trying to find the Source Temple because it contained a direct portal to the first garden, which is of course a realm of a divine being, specifically the goddess Astarte, and it is also where the God Box, which contained the Void Dragon, had been held. Now Zandalore basically explains exactly that he chased Leandra here, but he was too late. They came into direct combat, but with her Death Knights, she was able to overpower him. However, she did choose not to kill him, because she easily could have after basically knocking him unconscious in their fight. From here, Akara will appear and basically say much of the same thing. However, in finding this portal to the first garden, we actually managed to unlock the portal to the first garden at the end of time, or our homestead. At which point Akara will teleport us back, and they'll basically say, wrap up your business, because this is the final leg, and once we enter the first garden, there's no real going back. So we can do exactly that. This is your opportunity to wrap up any quests you haven't finished, do anything you haven't done, explore everything. And if you're like me and make a million save files, that won't have been an issue anyway. Either way, this is your last chance to do all of these things before carrying on into the first garden and what is ostensibly the end of the game. I considered ending the episode here and then doing this last part for a separate episode, but then I thought to myself, why not just make this a really big last episode? So that's what we are going to do. Now, when we get teleported to the first garden after a short conversation with all of our companions up to this point, explaining that there's no turning back from here, we will find ourselves teleported to a floating, kind of weird, astrally space-like place, and a giant stone Leandra will basically shout how terrible we are while we try to navigate this place. And at the end of every little island is a portal where a Leandra voice will call us a bunch of names and a failure, and you basically have to agree to get the teleporter to let you use it. And this goes on until you find a big portal at the end, and once you use that, you get teleported to a facsimile of sorts of the King Crab Inn. Now, the King Crab Inn is actually pretty cool. Like, I like this part of the game. It's just kind of neat. Because what they like to do here is, as you probably noticed, they spell everything backwards. So, like, the King Crab Inn is like it's like Pig Latin, I guess, where it's like the same word backwards kind of thing. I guess that's how they do that. In addition to everything being spelled backwards, you will also run into characters from various quests here, but like everything is just ever so slightly wrong. Like you can see Evelyn and the two people she was struggling to debate which one she should heal at the beginning of the game in Sliceal, but now Evelyn is the one who is sick and the two are deciding what to do to save her. So like it's like all the little side quests you were doing, but like a little twist on them, which I thought was really neat. And of course you can see a lot of the characters that you've basically just encountered throughout the game. But what you need to do is head down into the basement where you will find a book. Now once you click on this book, you'll be stunned immediately. Leandra will taunt you some more and you'll be able to get up. Now once you get up, you need to go back to the main floor, head into the room where there is a glowing cupboard that you can see through the map. You open this, Leandra once again knocks you to the floor and taunts you a bit before walking off. Then you need to click the cupboard, which will teleport you to a room upstairs. Now, this is where a lot of weird stuff starts going on. Like there's like a lot of giant crabs, that kind of thing. But basically what you need to do is keep hopping through portals until you get to exit all of the individual inn rooms and basically just kind of enjoy the views. They're hilarious. Now, once you get out of all of the actual like rooms, you will get into the lobby and be able to walk down the hallway. Now, if you walk all the way down the hallway, you're going to hit a locked door. So what you want to do is take the open door to the right on your way down. And through there, you eventually find Immaculates all circled around a dead goddess Astarte. And what you have to do is actually attack Astarte, and she will burn to cinders. All of the people surrounding her will disappear. And on the charcoal pile of ash that is now Astarte, you will find a key. Now this is the key to the door at the end of the hallway. So once you use this key, you can escape into a ruins of sort. That doesn't really make any sense. But once you walk up, you will run into first a woman known as General Alessa. So what I haven't mentioned up to this point is in addition to the 2 Source Hunter generals, there was actually a 3rd general called General Alessa. In the final battle against the Void, the 2 Source Hunters lost their faith, basically, and General Alessa used her power to save them, but it cost her her life. So it's not a fond memory for the Source Hunters, as you might imagine. And as you talk to her, she's of course taunting you because it turns out that it's not General Alessa, it is actually the Trife, which we met earlier on in the series. He is basically the Void's avatar of sorts, and also the being that originally tricked Astarte into tricking the Guardians to leave the God Box so Astarte could open it, thus releasing the Void. And this is where we get to finally kill the Trife. So his characters are really annoying. Like by himself he's fine, but like he summons these guys that will cast, I forget the name of the spell, but basically it makes it to where every time you cast any abilities, you'll take damage for it. So it's kind of annoying. But once he is dead, you will need to destroy the crystal horror that he is guarding behind him. And once that orb is destroyed, you will once again get knocked down. This time, you will wake up in a bright and sunny garden. And Zandalor will explain that you guys were trapped in something that is known as horror sleep. That the Trife, when you teleported to the first garden originally, actually trapped you guys in a sleep-like state and basically tried to kill you that way. Now, once everybody wakes up, you can carry on and you will find none other than Leandra in front of you. Contrary to what the game would have you believe, I actually think this is the hardest fight in the game. You're going to have to fight Leandra. There's no 2 ways about it. There's no way you can talk your way out of this fight. We'll get to some of the options that you can do after the end of it. But you do have to fight her some form or another. But again, she is, if you do not choose to cheese it, one of the hardest fights in the game. So what she'll do is she always gets the first turn, always. No matter how high your initiative is, she gets the first turn if you initiate combat, period. She will summon 3 demons, first off and foremost. Then she will summon 4 Void Knights. Some things to keep in mind. What the demons are going to do on their turn is cast Void Aura on 2 of themselves and Leandra. Void Aura makes things immune to damage, which is annoying by itself. And then furthermore, Leandra will then summon on her subsequent turns an Arcane Vortex. The Arcane Vortex has a physical immunity aura. So in addition to the blanket aura through Void Aura that the enemies will cast, she can also summon on subsequent turns this Arcane Vortex, which will make enemies in the surrounding area immune to physical damage. Now, on higher difficulties of the game, she will actually then summon on the 3rd round a magical immunity sphere that will make things immune to elemental magic. So, as you can see, through what I honestly think are just cheese mechanics and making themselves immune to basically everything, this is a very annoying fight if you choose to do it legitimately. Now, what you're supposed to do is kill one of the 3 demons that doesn't cast Void Aura on itself, or Leandra, so you'll kill that one first, and then the 2 demons will then cast Void Aura on one of themselves and Leandra. Then you can kill another demon, so on and so forth, and eventually, through many turns, the demons will die, they'll stop being able to protect Leandra, and then you can kill her. Which, if that was the only part of the fight, it would be fine. But then, again, you also have to deal with these physical and elemental immunity mobs that are the most annoying mobs of all time. So the physical immunity mob will straight up teleport if you hit him, which is beyond frustrating. And then the elemental mob, by the time he gets up, he's basically immune to everything, so you have to kill everything else first. It's a nightmare. However, there are many ways to cheese this fight. If you have high enough telekinesis, you can actually kill Leandra in one shot with the weight mechanic chest trick before she even spots you to initiate dialogue. So like you can literally one-shot her with this. The problem I don't like about this specifically, if you do it like exactly like this by just throwing it with a really high telekinesis, is if you don't kill her in one shot, she initiates dialogue, and then you can then kill her, sure, but at that point your two main characters will be stuck in a permanent dialogue loop, and there's no way to fix it. So if you're gonna cheese it, what I recommend doing is using either A, enough weight in the chest to kill her immediately without initiating any sort of dialogue. If you don't have a weighty enough chest to do that, what you're going to need to do is throw down a smoke screen, like a fog, a smoke grenade, something like that. So it blocks her field of vision, and then you can usually hit her twice like that, and then that will help a lot, and it'll keep your characters from getting bugged out. But after you defeat her, if Akara is with you, you can use the Soulforge repair scroll that you got from killing Cassandra to fix the Soulforge between Akara and Leandra, which will then turn them into like a super mage of sorts, because it turns them into one person. Thing is, I don't really recommend doing this. I think you should just kill Leandra, because if you do this, if you turn them into that one mage, they will actually wind up turning on you in the final battle, which is a little spoilery, sure, but just to let you know, I think Leandra should die. She's an awful person. From here, Leandra drops a wand that instantly kills Death Knights, and it also expunges the void from things. Now you need to pick up this wand, equip it, and use it on the big portal behind Leandra to purge the void from it, thus activating the portal. So once that is done, you can, of course, then go through the portal, and this is the absolute final map of the game, just so you're aware. So you will travel forward a little bit until you run into about 6 Death Knights. Now, if you're clever with the wand and play just at the edge of the range, you can usually kill all 6 of them without even actually initiating combat. Because if you initiate combat with these Death Knights, they keep coming in waves and waves, and it's an awful fight. So I actually recommend you kind of just get at the very edge of the range of the wand and just kill them all outright. It'll save you a lot of hassle. The experience isn't going to matter this late in the game, so just do it. And with that, we can walk to the bottom of this map down this big hill. And this is where it's awesome. So, once we walk up, Astarte will summon herself, I guess. I don't know. She shows up to the fight here. She summons herself in front of the God Box. The God Box, as you can see, is still intact, so that's useful. And Astarte will basically say that this is it. The Void Dragon has come. Prepare yourselves. And then, sure enough, the Void Dragon comes. This is a really cool fight. It's pretty difficult, honestly, if you do it the right way. The main thing is that you need to focus on the Void Dragon. All the things he's about to summon don't matter. They don't make him immune to anything. There's no, big mechanics. Focus the Void Dragon. If he dies, you win, period. And then, of course, you can also cheese him on any difficulty with the weight chest trick. You can hit him with it a couple times. Once you find that sweet spot, he'll die. He'll die like a bag of rocks. So pretty tough fight if you do it normally, though, just because there's a lot of summons and everything gets a lot of turns. But if you did all the things in the game, you should have Zandalore and Akara with you and Astarte at the very least, plus your 4-party team. So you should be decently okay. But it's a tough fight. It's the last fight of the game. So once the Void Dragon is dead, Astarte traps him in the God Box and purifies the source, which she explains to you, and we get this awesome cinematics proving it. Now, once this cinematic is over, we can basically request that Astarte send us back to where it all started, because Astarte releases the Source Hunters from their duty guarding the God Box, and she makes it her duty to guard the God Box, basically releasing these mortals from a lifetime of servitude to a cause they didn't ask for. And upon doing this, she will teleport you back to the Source Academy West, which is where you started, technically. And you can move through here once you get to the door of the actual proper building. None other than Captain Waitrius will talk to you, the guy who actually sent you on the mission to investigate the murder of Councillor Jake himself. You can meet him and talk to him right here. If you tell him the truth about what happened, he obviously doesn't believe you and sends you on your way. But basically you can explain that what happened to Councillor Jake, and you can technically wrap up that murder investigation finally and move on about your business. However, he does explain that you have some visitors, and inside you can talk to Arhu, Akara, people like that, just anybody you happen to kind of meet. They can all kind of meet in this room. You can put a nice little wrap up on your companions, and then once you're done with that, you and your Source Hunter companion can walk forward to the door at the end of the walkway out the back of the building. And once you click on this door, that's the end. It actually pans out. It shows zigzags telling this story to many imps, some of which are like, what? It's a fun little framing thing. And then the credits roll. So that, guys, is the full story of Divinity Original Sin. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed the series. I had a blast making it. It was a lot of fun for me personally. Following this up, there will be a discussion video about the goddess Astarte and the Void in Original Sin compared to Original 2. I kind of want to talk some about that, kind of explain some of the lore and my takes on some of it, because let's be real, there's some plot holes here. I'm definitely going to make a video about the background of Jhon, because he is just hands down my favorite character that is non-player. Like, he is my favorite NPC in the Original Sin games. Like, he's so cool. But that aside, thank you guys so much for watching. Really, from the bottom of my heart, I appreciate it. Thank you guys so much. Have a fantastic day, and I'll catch you guys soon.